committee meeting, and we are going to start out by going ahead and listening to special instructions. So if you want to, Terry, and go ahead and play that. This is our fourth PAC meeting, and please give your attention to the short video for your enjoyment this evening.
Let me see. Sorry, I'm having some issues with my Zoom here. It seems to have logged me out.
Well, that's a problem.
Yeah, sorry about that. I have the video ready to go and it's not appearing or letting me share.
Well, and is there someone else who is, because it has you still as host.
Yeah, I know. It just disappeared. Let's see here if I can get it to, let's see, Let's see. Sorry about this.
No. I've had such funny technology lately. It's just nothing phases me anymore.
Terry, and your screen is sharing. It's just showing
COVID-19. This meeting will be conducted as a Zoom meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Governor's Executive Order N-2920, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is being live streamed on the CCTA website. The chair will call upon members, staff, and other speakers by name. Please speak clearly and state your name before giving comments or remarks. Persons participating via Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. Members participating by Zoom wishing to speak should physically raise their hand and unmute their mic when called upon. Members should remute their mics when done speaking. Citizens participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the Raise Hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone, and the chair or staff will call upon them at the appropriate time. Citizens will have 3 minutes to speak. A 30-second warning will be provided. After 3 minutes, staff will lower their hand and mute their mic. Participants via phone will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone number. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received in accordance with the COVID-19 Special Notice for Public Comment Guidelines are printed on the meeting agenda. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they should raise their hand and the chair will call upon them at the appropriate time. All written correspondence received after that and during the meeting will be entered into the record. A roll call vote will be taken for all action items. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Thank you. We all were able to hear that, and I think we all almost have it memorized now. It's such a great thing we're going through. I don't know what we're going to do when we're back in real life. So at this time, let's go ahead and do a roll call of our committee tonight.
Okay, committee member Allen.
I don't see Deborah here yet.
Yeah. Committee member Haskew.
Here.
Committee member Obringer. Don't think I've seen her either. No. Committee member Perkins.
Here.
Thank you. Committee member Ross.
Here.
Committee member Stepper.
Here.
Committee member Storer.
Here.
Vice Chair Nowak.
Here.
Chair Anderson.
I am here.
Okay, we have a quorum and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 members present, and we have member Brown, Mitchoff, Allen, and Obringer absent.
Okay, and if Deborah does arrive, I will give her the opportunity to introduce herself, but I think most of us know Debbie pretty well, so I think she comes without introduction necessary, but she will be our newest member joining this committee representing BART. So at this time, we are going to turn it over to public comment, and this is the opportunity for anyone to speak about anything not on tonight's agenda, but under the purview of this 680 corridor committee. So is there anyone who wishes to make public comment, or Terry Ann, have you received any public comment prior to our meeting this evening?
I have not received any written public comment, and I do not see any public comment right now. I do want to note that member Allen just arrived.
Well, and Deborah, we would like to welcome you. And I don't know if you want to make any comments. We just recognized you before you came in as the newest member, now representing BART.
You're muted.
Thank you, and I apologize for being a little bit late. I am really honored to be a part of this committee, and thank you for having me. Look forward to doing some great work together.
Okay, well, thanks. We're delighted to have you with us, Deb. Okay, so now we've already done public comment. We are going to move on to our consent calendar, and this is on it tonight, the approval of our minutes from October 14th, 2020. Any changes, comments from any commissioners, and please either raise your hand virtually or wave at me. I am not seeing any. Oh, Scott, do you have a correction for us or a comment?
You're muted, Scott.
Sue's going to be the sergeant at arms.
That's my job, Candace, as vice chair. I'll help you out on the muting thing.
As vice chair, she's going to tell you when you're muted and you're just moving your lips. So anyway, Scott, what did you have to say?
I moved the consent calendar.
Okay, you got a motion.
Second.
Okay, well, I think Luella even beat you, Karen. She wasn't as loud as you, but her hand shut up.
No,
faster.
that's just fine.
So we're going to give Luella the second, and if we could please have a roll call vote on that.
Member Allen?
Yes. Oh, I probably should abstain on the minutes.
Yeah, you can, unless you see something horrible in it, you're allowed to vote on them even if you weren't there.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Member Haskew?
Yes.
Member Perkins?
Yes.
Member Ross?
Yes.
Member Storer?
Yes.
Member Stepper?
Yes.
Vice Chair Nowak?
Yes.
Chair Anderson?
Yes.
And we have Mitchoff and Brown absent. I just want to make sure that Obringer is still absent.
I am not seeing her here. I don't see Carlin. Okay.
So passes unanimously with Brown, Mitchoff, and Obringer absent.
Thank you so much. So our next item, and this is going to be item 4A, it's informational, so we will not need to vote on it, and it's going to be presented by our new leader, Tim Hale. He's going to provide an update on Innovate 680 program and project.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Hale. I'm the new Executive Director for Contra Costa Transportation Authority. Excited to be here to give this presentation to you and really appreciate your time and being part of the Innovate 680 Policy Advisory Committee. We have a really full agenda for you this evening, and so we wanted to just provide you a really quick update on the status of the projects and the program for Innovate 680. So I'm going to share my screen and run through this fairly quickly so we can leave time for any questions. So as you know, in Innovate 680, we have 6 projects. One of the projects is the Express Lane Completion Project. And at the last Policy Advisory Committee, we did an overview of some of the alternatives that we are looking at as part of this alternative. I'm happy to report that Alternative 1B, which was the alternative that was moving the BART column, that alternative has now been officially retired, and we are moving towards Alternative 1C for the Close the Gap alternative. And this is the alternative that I showed you last time that realigned the 24 southbound connector to allow for room for the express lanes in the actual freeway corridor. Alternative 2, we've made some progress on that in terms of the reduced of gap alternative and looked at some operational improvements between the North Main and Treat Boulevard. And I also showed this to you last time in a visual simulation. So since then, the team has retired the Collector Distributor Road alternative, and we're now moving to the braided ramp alternative, which is that overcrossing of the on-ramp and the off-ramp basically crossing over each other. And the reason why is this braided ramp alternative has less impact to the existing Walnut Creek maintenance facility. Also will not impact the existing truck facilities. And from a traffic operation standpoint, it does perform better than the Collector Distributor Road. So one of the things you're going to hear more tonight about is VMT, Vehicles Miles Traveled, and SB 743 implementation. And this is a key project in that. And we are still trying to identify feasible and enforceable proportional VMT mitigation strategies for this project, as well as coordinate with the ramp metering project that Caltrans is taking the lead on. The automated driving system project, we got the FTA agreement approved by the authority board last year. We submitted everything to FTA and we're now awaiting our final notice to proceed. We are working on multiple agreements with our vendors and consultants. We are actually taking Advanced Mobility Group's contract to the board this month, and then Nissan and Verizon next month. And we plan on having a kickoff meeting in March. So this has been a long time coming, about 18 months since we've got the notice of award from US DOT. And this is really, these technology projects, I can just say, are not easy, dealing with private partners and public partners and really meeting all of the requirements that FTA is putting upon us as part of this grant. But I'm happy to say that we've met all the requirements and we're moving towards kicking this project off soon. Mobility as a service. This project we have been doing a lot of work on. It's moving forward quite rapidly. FHWA has commented on the concept of operations package 2. And package 2 is essentially the transit mobility assets that we'll be looking at as part of the mobility app that we're developing, that has the trip planner, the scheduler, the integrate the fare, as well as the incentives within that mobile app. So transit integration into that mobile app is extremely important in terms of providing that first and last mile service, as well as the package 3, which is the app itself. That's actually developing the trip planner, the scheduler, the fare integration, as well as the incentives in the overall program. So those are the two main packages that we're working on right now. And as you can be appreciative of this, we are dealing with some COVID-19 financial impacts, both with BART and County Connection. And so we're closely monitoring that. No direct impacts have been realized yet, but we are closely monitoring that as the overall project moves forward. The Advanced Technology Project, we're continuing to coordinate with Caltrans on the coordinated adaptive ramp metering strategy, and you heard a lot more about that at the last meeting as well, in terms of the direction that we're taking that and working closely with Caltrans as part of their ramp metering project, which you see there at the bottom of the slide. So we are working on an integrated team where we will closely integrate the Caltrans staff and team with the Innovate 680 consultant and CCTA staff team. We'll be discussing that at the program leadership team meeting in February. Caltrans is actively working on their ramp metering project. They are working on the environmental document phase. They have initiated that, and they are developing the overall footprint for their environmental studies, as well as working closely with our team on utility data and traffic analyses. So one of the key components here is making these two projects are really coordinated well as they continue to move forward. The part-time transit lane project is continued on hold, although we still continue to evaluate its merits in the overall strategic program, as well as the Share Mobility Hub project. The Share Mobility Hub project, we are potentially going to start moving that forward probably in the next several months. It is a key component to the overall vehicle miles strategy, vehicle miles travel strategy that you'll hear later tonight. And we are definitely making sure these two projects are incorporated into the overall program concept of operation. So one of the things I did want to do is we know that you all like visual simulations. And so we have prepared a visual simulation of how these two projects will actually coordinate and work together. So if you give me a minute, I'm going to stop sharing and share another screen here. So hopefully you can see this. So this is an example of a share mobility hub, and we particularly looked at the Bollinger Canyon Park and Ride down in San Ramon. And this is what we wanted to use as an example, how it coordinates with both the part-time transit lane project and the share mobility hub that would be at Walnut Creek BART. And so by looking at this, as you all know, share mobility hubs are really the linchpin in the Innovate 680 program to provide first and last mile strategies and personalized mobility options in and around our large employment centers, but also within our neighbors to really provide better access to transportation options so that way that people don't have to use their cars. Some of the things you've been hearing about is the travel behavior study, and we've been noted based on our surveys, and you'll hear more about that tonight, but people are willing to walk anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to a share mobility hub to get access to a personalized mobility option. And that could be a number of things. It could be a share autonomous vehicle, a shuttle, on-demand transit, as well as ride hailing, carpooling, as well as just regular transit. And so this is an example of what a share mobility hub would look like. As you know, one of the key goals of Innovate 680 is mode shift. And so this again is this strategy is really intended to help with that first and last mile and mode shift in the overall corridor. And so I'm going to click play and we can continue watching the video. You can see the example of the shared mobility hub and the shared autonomous vehicle. This would be an SAV that would be collecting people in the afternoon from Bishop Ranch that would want to return back to Walnut Creek BART. And so this is an example of what this trip and what this would look like during the afternoon peak period. So as you can kind of see in the shared mobility hub, I'm going to hit pause real quick. What's important about the shared mobility hub is really making sure this is set up for placemaking, making sure that people have access to information to the next arriving mode option, whether that be transit or a shuttle, or an Uber or a Lyft or a carpool opportunity, all of this being coordinated through our mobility as a service platform and application. So that this is another example of how integrated all of these projects are and why it's important that we keep these integrated through a program level concept of operations. And we really want to make this set up for placemaking. So you notice here, you'll kind of see it here in a bit, but we could have coffee shops, food trucks, etc. We want these shared mobility hubs to be attractive to people wanting to go there, wanting to access the amenities that are here and provided to you, and also access to transportation. And so as we continue through this, you'll see this coffee shop, as well as we like the Contra Costa coffee. We joke that we probably should use this everywhere and anywhere. Bike lockers, micromobility will be key in terms of bike sharing, additional areas for pedestrians to be able to sit and have Wi-Fi access. Transit would then access this share mobility hub through either County Connection or LAFTA. And through this transit option, it would leave the share mobility hub and go to I-680 northbound using the Bollinger Canyon interchange. And this is where bus on shoulder really starts showing its merits during the congested peak period in the afternoon. As you all aware, so the way bus on shoulder works is we want to only allow the buses to be in those shoulders 35 miles an hour or less. I'm going to just pause there for a second. And this really is intended to provide attractive, efficient, reliable transit service. And when there is an available auxiliary lane, as shown in the video, the bus would actually use the auxiliary lane in lieu of the shoulder. And so down through Danville and San Ramon, there's quite a bit of auxiliary lanes all the way up to El Cerro. And so the bus would be using the auxiliary lanes as it's progressing through the corridor. And it's really important, again, to emphasize that our primary goal here is safety, making sure that this is being done in a very safe way, both using technology on the buses, using forward warning collision, lane keeping, automated control, heads-up displays, and making it easy for the driver to navigate in these shoulders in a very safe way. And I think it's important here also to really notice that there's two speed differentials that are really happening along the corridor too. You have the express lanes on the left side. You also now have the bus on shoulder on the right side. So it's also going to be really important that education and outreach is really important about this strategy, making sure people understand how these lanes work, how the shoulder works, and what types of vehicles are allowed in the shoulder, and that would only be buses. So as we continue down the bus on shoulder, it would continue on to the Walnut Creek BART station. It would exit Ignacio Valley Road and Ignacio Valley Road, sorry. And then it would basically exit the off ramp here and make a left onto Ignacio Valley Road. And then it would basically use the slip ramp to tie and go into the brand new parking structure there at Walnut Creek BART. The person would exit the transit bus, and then through a series of wayfinding signs, someone will be able to go and find their way to the necessary amenities at the Walnut Creek BART station and move towards to Walnut Creek BART itself. Or if they so choose, they could choose another mode of option of their choice if they have another first and last mile trip. And this is really what you just saw is a accumulation of probably 3 or 4 projects and about pretty much all of the seven strategies of part of Innovate 680. We really wanted to show, you know, how all of this really works together. And I think I have one more slide for you. One second. A little hard because I got multiple applications here. So since we last time we've met, there's been 3 additional TAC, Technical Advisory Committee, CONOP meetings, number 6, 7, and 8, where we learned more about the cooperative adaptive ramp metering, as well as talking more about how does all of these strategies work together. And I just demonstrated that through the visual simulation. And then the last one, we got a deep dive into the automated driving system project. And so typically what happens in following our governance structure, you know, we look at this, we get feedback from the TAC members, and we identify which operational scenarios, what things need to be discussed by the Policy Advisory Committee. And you'll actually hear more about that at a later agenda item, more focused on transit. So this meeting tonight is really addressing your feedback. Since we started this group, there's been a lot of interest of how transit will work in this corridor. And so this entire meeting is really focused around travel behavior and transit and how important transit is in the overall corridor. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Candace, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
Who's muted?
Candace, you're muted. Oh, she knows.
Terry Ann, I think you need to unmute her.
I'm looking for her.
How about if I let Karen ask her question while you're working? Karen, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Tim, I'm trying to place the what you call the braided ramps that seem to already be at Treat already, and you're saying you're going to put them there, and how that's going to intersect with this new, let's say it was the bus on shoulder going in to Ignacio to get to the BART there. Is there going to be some overlap there also?
No. So the bus on shoulder actually exits Ignacio Valley Road, which is actually south of the Treat and Lawrence Way confluence area. So what we're talking about,
I go there a lot. Yes.
Yeah. So the braided ramp is basically for Lawrence Way going northbound, and then it would braid essentially over Treat Boulevard exit. And then that would access the truck scales there. So this is right just north of the 24 interchange, north of Main Street. So that's where that braided ramp configuration would be, is at Lawrence Way and Treat. And then the bus on shoulder is south of there at Ignacio Valley Road, exits Ignacio. Okay. So bus on shoulder is not intended to continue any farther past Ignacio Valley Road. What would
Yes.
happen after Ignacio Valley Road is the buses would actually use the express lanes going to the north from that point forward.
Okay, you answered both questions there. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
No, and with that, and thank you. It wouldn't let me unmute myself, so thank you for unmuting. So the other question is, obviously, it sounds like then you're talking the bus on shoulder or the transit lane, just being pretty much Bollinger to Ignacio. Would we mark the lanes in any additional way, just with signage, or would there be some graphic on the lane itself? And you said you were going to use the aux lanes or the auxiliary lanes that already exist that run really from Bollinger all the way up to Sycamore. So any way to designate those, because you'd allow autos in them as well, wouldn't you? You would exclude the automobiles from the auxiliary lanes.
So the auxiliary lanes, when the bus is using the auxiliary lane, the autos would still continue to use the auxiliary lanes.
Good. Okay.
So there wouldn't be any differentiation there. It's only when the bus uses the shoulder. Only use the shoulder. So to answer your question, yes, we would have additional signage along the shoulder, and also probably changeable messages signs probably to indicate when the shoulder is okay to use for the buses.
Right.
So that whole sign package is being further developed as part of the part-time transit lane project and through the CONOP process. And it's important that we coordinate with our partners at CHP, Caltrans, our transit operators, et cetera, and as well as making sure there's robust training for those drivers so that way they understand, a lot of the issues in terms of speed differential, safe traveling on the shoulder, as well as all the signs that would give them the ability to use the shoulder.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully even maybe speak to something within the bus that would say it's okay to be on, but now it's okay, now it's not. Something very simple where they're not having to overthink it. Okay, other questions by members? Go ahead, Sue, please.
So you're saying the auxiliary lanes can be used by cars as well as buses? That wouldn't be,
That's correct.
So on normal days, you would have those, they really aren't auxiliary lanes, they're just regular lanes then.
But they're auxiliary lanes now. That's why they were built. There's two sets of them. There's Bollinger to Crow and Crow to Sycamore. And they pretty much, it's almost like an on-ramp that you can take all the way through to get to the next exit. And so when Danville and San Ramon,
I see what you're saying.
So those, rather than building another bus on shoulder, building that up, they're going to utilize those existing lanes, which I think Danville and San Ramon would be very upset if we said, sorry, just for buses now, because they really have done a really nice job of relieving a lot of congestion on surface streets, because it's so easy if you're trying to get across town to just hop on the aux lanes and get right out.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense, sorry. And then the other question is, so when you get north of Ignacio, you're going to go on the aux lanes, but you're having, on a busy day, you're going to have to cross all the lanes of traffic to go from the shoulder over to the auxiliary lanes? I mean, not to the auxiliary lanes, so the aux lanes?
Yeah, so keep in mind what we've done is we developed a bus on shoulder feasibility study, and we identified that segment between Bollinger and Ignacio as kind of a first phase pilot, right? Yeah. And so what we would do is through that feasibility study, if the pilot deemed successful by our partners, Caltrans, CHP, then we would be looking for opportunities to expand that through the corridor. But until then, we would be basically using the shoulder just within that location. And then the buses, as you were saying, would have to enter the 680 freeway, and then they would have to merge across all the lanes to get to the express lane. They would stay in the express lane, all the way to basically Martinez or Concord. And then but that's one of the benefits of bus on shoulder, is that the buses don't have to merge across all the lanes. And so we're using, and by crossing all over the lanes, that causes additional weaving and congestion potentially. And so that's one of the benefits of bus on shoulder. So essentially what you're doing is you're with bus on shoulder, and part of this demonstration of bus on shoulder within the corridor, you're really weighing the operational benefits, the travel time benefits, but you also are weighing that against potential safety benefits, because having a bus in the shoulder, there are some safety concerns from our partners. And so it's important that we have to evaluate through that demonstration, does the travel time and operational benefits, essentially outweigh the safety issues and concerns.
What period of time would that sort of test phase go over?
We're still working through those details as part of the part-time transit lane project, but we're anticipating probably a 2-year pilot. It'll be a 2-year pilot. So.
Okay, other questions by committee? Oh, Mark, look at you. You've got your virtual hand up. Very good. Go ahead, Mark. But Terry, and you may have to unmute him because
no, I can.
Oh, go! You can unmute yourself. Okay, maybe, yeah, maybe it's just me.
It's amazing. And,
yeah.
Thank you. Well, Sue got about 90% of my questions, so she very
great minds think alike, Mark.
That we do. And by the way, congratulations, Tim. I don't think I've seen you since you've been appointed. Congratulations. So I guess the residual question I had is the connectivity. Would somebody on the app be able to connect to outside, to private rides, like to any? Yes. So that'll be embedded in the app, and they won't have to switch between the two.
Yeah, that's correct. So basically, the way it would work, let's just maybe talk about Uber or Lyft, for example. Yeah. So basically, what would happen is we would integrate our mobile application and do what they call a deep integration. So what would happen is that when you click an Uber ride, what would do is it would automatically, there's 2 ways of doing that. And that's part of what we're doing in terms of developing the mobility, the concept of operations, so that package 3 I was talking about, we'll kind of talk a little bit more about how this stuff really integrates together. But there's 2 ways of doing that. One is through direct API, where it's pretty seamless. The other one would be through deep integration. And that means that you would actually leave our app and go to the Uber app to basically complete the transaction and then come back to our app. But that would happen seamless and automatedly through what's called a deep integration.
Excellent.
Great. And how many other transit agencies, and that was Mark sort of leads with one of my questions. So I'm assuming you would, of course, be having County Connection. Would you be having all transit operators in the Bay Area, all in just Contra Costa? Obviously, we'd have BART in there. How broad would this app be?
So as part of the grant, we basically are working with our partners at County Connection and BART at this time.
Okay.
And then basically what we're doing with the grant is showing proof of concept in terms of the architecture and how it works. And then once we show proof of concept and satisfy our grant, then we would be looking to start expanding other transit operation options, as well as any other mobility options. I mean, any other mobility options. The intention is to have this set up in a way that it's open architecture to where we can add mobility options as they come available within our county and throughout the Bay Area for that matter.
Right, because I would think it would be really important too, given the proximity of the Iron Horse Trail to most of our park and rides, to have share bicycles, so that someone wanting to say, okay, if I get to this bus stop, can I hop on a bike to take me the last mile or two, or a scooter or whatever else is up there. So I think it would be very important to have many alternative mobilities, as well as the carpool. And that's, I think, going to be very important when we get back to more normal commutes. And particularly as MTC gets sterner and stricter about having more than 2 people in a vehicle to get into a toll lane or to get over a bridge or something else, I think we may see quite a resurgence of people wanting to do the carpool. It's not just about money anymore. It's about getting another body in the car. Go ahead.
Yeah, just one last comment. One thing I forgot to mention that's really important as part of this in the discussion today. So what's really important about Innovate 680 is this integrated, seamless travel in the corridor. No one really cares that it's a County Connection bus or a LAFTA bus. All they really want is get to point A to point B seamlessly, in the corridor, and also making sure that we have connection protection. So making sure that, if you noted kind of in the video, buses were already arriving on time. Then you would have another next mode of transportation right next to it already waiting for you, such as the Ollie shuttle or transit bus. And so, The important thing here is to make sure we've got integrated seamless travel. We're minimizing wait times, and that people are able to jump from one mode to another mode, so that way transfers are very seamless. And so that's an important aspect to Innovate 680, and making sure, and you'll hear a lot about this today in the transit presentations, is that it's important that we're all integrated and coordinating, through this seamless travels experience.
Well, and with that seamless, for those of us who have also been working on alternative transportation for those with disabilities, those who need our senior population, eventually would you see this app as having that ability then to integrate those trips as well, where Rossmore resident wants to get to Kaiser Walnut Creek, but then needs to pick up their medication somewhere else, those sorts of trips.
Yeah, the important thing is with the mod app is make sure it's scalable, and we're able to do this in a phased approach. And so, yeah, depending on how we really address accessible transportation, because as you know, the authorities do an accessible transportation plan. And so depending on how, yes.
What I was curious about, because I've been sitting on the accessible transportation, we're trying to define what that looks like, and having that sort of mobility hub where there's sort of no wrong door is sort of the goal of a lot of us, where you call up and you say, I need a ride here, and then somebody tells them what kind of ride they're going to get or what'll be most efficient. Ultimately, having the app to be able to do it would be very, very helpful, not necessarily for some of our more senior riders, but for their caretakers, perhaps, or for even the mobility hub that's trying to get them to the right place. I think that would be helpful. Okay, other questions, comments by board members or committee members? And then if not, I'm going to go to the public that is here, which is a lot of staff folks. Any questions from anyone else who is here tonight?
Can I just ask, was my screen the only one that froze a few times during that presentation?
Yes, it was.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I just want to make sure.
Bandwidth. It was going great for the rest of us, and I saw you left, and then you came back. So
okay, thanks.
I think you need to talk to Comcast or AT&T, whoever's wiring your house. Okay. Any other questions, comments on this? Great report, Tim. Very, very helpful to see where we're headed with this. And I speak for, I think for all of us, we know how much behind the scenes work is going on to come up with these alternatives and to get us to this point. So thank you. Okay, so we are now going to move on. This is also an informational item, and this is going to be presented by Chief Chris Costigan and Darren Henderson of the Innovate 680 Corridor and Safety Mobility Trend Monitoring pre and post COVID. So this is where we're going to have an overview of safety mobility trend monitoring that's being done on I-680. And so I see Chief Costigan is here, and Darren.
Supervisor Anderson.
Welcome. Let's see, and I see.
I believe Chief Costigan's actually going to go first. Tim, if you want to advance to the next slide, we're going to start with the safety trend monitoring. I guess just a quick introduction. So as Supervisor Anderson was implying, we've been tracking some measures of highway performance and transit performance since the onset of COVID. This information is useful to us as we evaluate the projects that are part of the Innovate 680 program and make sure that we're adjusting for changes in travel conditions when we're doing forecasts and those types of things, but also trying to track the trend as we move forward and to understand what the implications of those changes in travel patterns might be to our future plans. And actually, the presentation following ours is going to get into a lot more detail on the transit side. And I know it includes some slides on BART's forecasting for where they see the transit market going in the next few years and sort of the range of uncertainty that they see. So this is really sort of tying all of these things together. But we're going to start with just a quick overview of conditions in the 680 corridor and what we're seeing in terms of safety, and then also just in terms of EMP volumes and transit ridership. So Chief Costigan.
Hi, good evening. Everybody hear me okay?
Can hear you
Yes.
well. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. First, just a quick little background. This is my 32nd year with the Highway Patrol. I've been involved in transit programs, not only across the state of California, but nationally since about 2015. And I've been working on these various types of bus on shoulder, part-time transit lane, wrong way driver programs, not only here, but with Texas, Florida, Arizona, and more. But so anyway, in my current position, I'm the chief of Golden Gate Division. And just to give you some reference, I oversee about 1,500 people covering the 9 Bay Area counties. Contra Costa County obviously is one of those. And what I'm here to do tonight is just talk about some of the trends we're seeing specific to Golden Gate Division, but more specifically Contra Costa County. So I'll just jump right into some of the stuff we have if we can move the next slide. So the Contra Costa area located there at Highway 4 and 680 there in Martinez is 69 patrol officers. They cover I-80, State Route 4, I-680, SR-24, and 242, approximately 662 miles of unincorporated county roads and 180 miles of freeway. What we've seen between 2019 and 2020 is about a 16% reduction in calls for service. So our estimated numbers for 2020 were about 63,000 calls for service throughout the year, handled by those 69 officers. Next slide. Just some general citation information. Golden Gate Division as a whole, covering the whole Bay Area. These are kind of the breakdown of our citations. We've seen about a 21% reduction in citations. Now that is in some cases due to reduced vehicle traffic, but there are other contributing factors. As you all well know, there's been the COVID effect on everything, in addition to the national civil unrest we've been dealing with, which is taking resources away. And on top of that, we had some very significant fires, wildland fires this year, which took a large portion of our staff away from enforcing the traffic laws on the freeway. So kind of a breakdown, if you look at the graph on the right, it gives you a breakdown of the citations within Golden Gate Division. The green is other, the blue on top is carpool express lanes, the blue towards the bottom is distracting driving. The gray is DUI or open containers. And although the colors on my screen are not matching up with what I printed. And then all to their right is the speeding citations, which about 98,000 speeding citations throughout the division. So 257,000 or so citations given out throughout the entire division. The next slide, I'll break it down by Contra Costa County. Okay, there you go. There's about the same. There's been a 16% reduction in Cocoa County for citations. There on the right, you'll see that we had about 8,400 other citations, which, you know, that could be following too close to lane changes, other types of issues. 1,026, both DUI and open containers, most of those being DUI, and about 9,000 speed citations issued in Contra Costa County in 2020. And next slide. Here's where things get concerning is anybody who's driven on the highways recently has just seen the dramatic increase in speed as the VMT has fallen and the congestion has fallen, speed has gone up. It's a daily occurrence to have multiple people out there well over 100 miles an hour. In fact, I dealt with one personally the other day at 135 miles an hour. The speeds have gone up. So this slide covers the crash picture throughout Golden Gate Division. There's been a 33% reduction in total crashes, 2019 versus 2020, which is great information. And it's great to see that crashes have gone down by that much. But overall, throughout the Bay Area, we had a 6% rise in fatal crashes. So the three main contributing factors to fatal collisions are speed, distraction, and DUI. And as that speed differential increases, we're noticing, even though with a 33% reduction in total crashes, we saw a 6% increase in fatals, which is a very concerning trend. And then the next slide, if you'll advance, we'll talk about Contra Costa County specifically. Cocoa has seen an even bigger reduction. So there's only been a 27% reduction in total crashes, but there's been a 77% increase in fatal crashes in the county. I know that we, in fact, this trend is more than just in Cocoa. I have a breakdown. It's not a slide for you there, but I have just a breakdown of where the current fatal crashes have been happening. And the increase in Golden Gate Division has been not only Contra Costa, but the Hayward, Oakland, and Castro Valley areas. So kind of that hub right there is seeing a significant increase in fatal crashes, whereas you have more towards the west, such as Redwood City, San Francisco. Santa Rosa has always been kind of an area for a lot of crashes. They've all seen reductions. So we're still trying to analyze this trend, as some of the more traditional areas that had high numbers of fatals have gone down, but more in the East Bay, Cocoa, and Alameda County has had the significant increase. So we've done a couple things. One is the area commanders for Oakland, Castro Valley, Redwood, Hayward, and Dublin, as well as Contra Costa, have got together, and they're looking for trend analysis in these fatal crashes. So they pull somewhere between 20 to 25 different data points to see if they can find commonalities in those collisions to identify trends that maybe we can combat. The other thing is, we did one day last year, we used over 900 hours of overtime in one day. It was a little difficult to slide that in with everything going on, all the other distractions we had in 2020, just to focus on primary collision factor, speed, and DUI type of incidents, and that was very effective. And I'm gonna give you you're kind of the first to know tonight. We're doing a safety corridor enforcement period this Saturday, and it's going to cover Interstate 80 from the city of San Francisco to the Nevada state line. So working in conjunction with our Valley Division partners, we're going to have extra officers funded on overtime through the Office of Traffic Safety grants to work speed and aggressive driving all the way from San Francisco to the Nevada state line. So while these numbers here in Contra Costa County showing the 77% increase are disturbing, I'll just give you the base numbers division-wide. We went from 219 fatalities in 2019 to 243 in 2020. So that trend in Cocoa went from 29 to 49, but there was reduction in other places. So it was about a 10% increase overall, looking compared 2019 to 2020, looking at the final numbers. Some of the numbers I provided in the slide were preliminary. The way our data works, it doesn't become finalized for quite some time. So those numbers do fluctuate as the data becomes finalized. So anyway, that's kind of a quick overview of the crash picture and enforcement picture in Cocoa County. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them for you.
Okay, so committee members, does anyone have any questions for Chief Costigan? What a good bunch. Oh, there we go. So go ahead. You know what's funny is can we not share the screen for a moment, or you have to use your virtual hand because I can't see everybody.
Oh, sorry. I should have done the virtual hand. No, my just quick question was, could we get a copy of those slides? I would love to be able to sort of mention that some of that information at our city council meeting.
Yeah, I provided slides to Danielle, so she can share those with you. Just keep in mind
okay.
Those stats are preliminary and they are subject to change over the next until they become finalized, but they're rough estimates at this point.
Okay, great.
If they are finalized, let's have them sent out to the committee, because I agree it's helpful data, and it's kind of shocking to see that many fatal crashes. I would love to at some point see some of if you do find sort of root causes, how many of those were attributed to DUIs, how many of those were attributed simply to speed. I think we all recognize with fewer cars on the road, people do think they can go a lot faster. So if you have the top 5 reasons, that would be really helpful to understand why we saw the 70% plus increase in our county.
Well, I mean, the numbers won't be finalized for between 12 and 18 months, and that's why I provided it here for you. So
Yeah.
in the top 5 reasons almost never change. It's been consistent for decades, and speed by distraction are always the top 3. A couple other very in there, but consistently for decades, that's been the main problem, and that's why where the Office of Traffic Safety tends to focus their grant hours for enforcement and on. So if there's something specific you need, I'd be happy. I can pull anything you need locally, and or I can put you in touch with the Contra Costa Area Commander, and he can do a more specific presentation at whatever event you're having, which might be a little more beneficial for Q&A for your constituents.
Okay, terrific.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Candace. And thank you, Chief, for the great presentation. Mark Ross from City of Martinez. Not that anybody would ever drive in auxiliary lanes or bus lanes. I mean, no citizen would ever take it upon themselves to cheat and use those when they're not supposed to. But just in case, what did you see the previous? I don't know if you saw the previous presentation about the auxiliary lanes and bus lanes on 680.
Well, in auxiliary lanes, you're allowed to drive it. And I think that's what I asked Tim. So you can drive those, but driving on the shoulder would be a good example, especially if it's, we've firmed it up for bus on shoulder. Are you asking him what sort of a violation that would be? What kind of a fine? I'm just wondering if the enforcement of driving on the shoulder, which I can only imagine, I see people doing it now where there isn't a shoulder. I mean, it's gotten a little more noticeable to me, but I'm just wondering, in conjunction with our introduction of these bus lanes on the shoulder, will the CHP have an idea of stepped up enforcement of those?
Well, I can tell you, Tim Hale and I have worked for about the past year on this project, and I've worked on other projects from Truckee to San Diego. And there's a lot of safety concerns with the bus on shoulder or part-time transit lane project. Right now, it's illegal to drive on the shoulder, according to Vehicle Code Section 21755. There are some streets and highway code that Caltrans believes they can use to designate a transit lane on the shoulder. The problem is there's no vehicle code definition for what a transit bus is. So our enforcement would be limited just to passenger vehicles or motorcycles because it's still a violation of that code. Our concerns moving forward, though, is without a strong education campaign, you will probably find people who will tend to follow those buses on the shoulder. And that makes enforcement complicated because that's where we do our enforcement. So in order for us to enforce those violations, we in effect will shut down those part-time transit lanes to do it. So those are some of the things we're working out. There's a guidance document that Caltrans is developing that we're a part of that discussion too. So this is an ongoing discussion. Everybody's aware of many of the safety aspects with it, and we're trying to mitigate those as best as possible to make it safe. But there are some significant safety concerns, enforcement as well, and we're working on a bunch of different projects in order to handle that. So yeah, it could be problematic, but we are looking at ways to address it.
Well, thank you, Chief. If all else fails, you can tell them that if they drive in the bus lane, they have to spend the night at the old jail in Martinez.
If it's still there, Mark, is it going to? Are you going to save it? God,
No.
I just passed a resolution yesterday.
I watched it yesterday. Thank you, Chief. Yes.
Okay. Besides the old jail, any questions by anyone else? Any comments by anyone not on the committee that have any questions? Okay, well, let's move on to our next presentation then. And so this next one is talking about, I think we're moving right into the transit component. Staff from BART is going to talk about it, and County Connection and LAVTA. You're going to provide an update about current status of transit operations in the corridor.
We actually have we have a second part to that last.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, we do. Then let's have that second part of the last one. I apologize.
But I will be very quick. So we'll get so queuing up the transit one was very appropriate. So we do have a couple of, or 3 slides that cover some broader picture mobility trends in the corridor, both on the highway side and the transit side. So Tim, if you want to advance to the first one. So the first measure is looking at VMT, vehicle miles of travel. So this is the aggregate of all travel that was occurring in Contra Costa County and in this case, we just look at Wednesdays as a sample date. And so you can see on the left-hand side of the chart, 100% back in January, February, pre-COVID. That was sort of a normal level that we would expect to see in Contra Costa County. You can see the very sudden drop after March the 11th when the COVID restrictions went into effect. And we basically saw VMT in the county drop by about half or a little over half. It slowly crept back up through the spring and into the summer. And you see that little peak there about a third the way across where it says 78%. That was right before July 4. We saw the level kind of stabilize around the 70% mark through the summer. Some fluctuations towards the end of the summer. You see that one drop down to 59%. That was the week that you had wildfires causing all of the smoke in the region. That did have an effect, obviously, on travel. Continue through the fall. You see the spike there at the very end. That's the week before Christmas. So obviously a lot of people getting out and about to do their Christmas shopping. And then after Christmas, we saw the COVID restrictions clamp down again as the COVID rates went up, and we fell back down to around the 50% mark. So we're basically back to where we were at the start of the pandemic in terms of the levels of travel. But hopefully as we get more into the year, more vaccines, those sorts of issues are helping to address the COVID situation, and we'll start to see this gradually climb back up towards normal levels. On the next slide, we actually show a couple of count locations on I-680 itself. On the left side, we're looking at the northbound direction, and that's the PM peak period. On the right side, you're looking at the southbound direction. That's the AM peak period. The dark line on the left side is just north of State Route 24, and the light blue line is further south down around El Costa. You can see, and then on the right side, sorry, it's the dark blue line is just south of SR 24, and the light blue line is just south of the bridge at the north end of the county. In 3 of the 4 cases, you can see that the volumes prior to COVID relatively stable, and then you see the sudden drop about 2/3 of the way across the chart when COVID became effective. And then the levels have climbed up to about sort of 3/4 of what they were before the pandemic, with the exception of the location north of State Route 24, where there wasn't as large of a decline, and it actually has recovered to levels that are higher than they were before the pandemic. I think this one's actually an anomaly, consistent with what Chief Costigan was pointing out with regard to higher speeds with less traffic. You are obviously all very well aware that that location was very, very congested prior to COVID, where 24 and 680 come together just north of State Route 24. And what that does during the PM peak hours, it actually reduces the flow of traffic through that section. And so I think what this chart is actually showing us is that post-COVID, now that we're not seeing as much congestion in that corridor, you're actually moving more vehicles than we were before during the PM peak period. You can see towards the end that we're seeing the levels drop back down. That is likely a combination of 2 things. One is the Christmas holiday period, but also it's likely that congestion is starting to reform. I was actually out there this morning and saw that. So we're probably seeing those flow rates in the PM peak period starting to get affected again and falling back down to pre-COVID levels as we get less productivity through that section. So it's a little bit of an unusual anomaly that came with the pandemic, but that is the reason that the northbound or the Express Lanes completion project and rated ramps that Tim was talking about before are being developed as a way to help mitigate that congestion that we saw previously. And then the last slide is really the most pronounced impact of the pandemic, and we're going to talk a lot more about this in the next part of the presentation on the transit side. This is transit ridership in the county in the 680 corridor, and you can see the very, very abrupt decline in transit ridership that happened post February of last year. Basically, levels have fallen down to about to less than 20% of what they were previously, and they've pretty much remained stagnant at that levels through the entire pandemic. So I will really not go any further on that. It speaks for itself. But as I said, the next part of the presentation is going to get into a lot more detail on transit and the implications of COVID and other issues. So I'll take any questions anyone has, and then we can.
No, thank you, Darren. It's funny, your V graph showing the it sort of looks like an economic recovery graph that we're all looking at right now as well. So
yeah, yes, there's a lot of parallels.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Okay, any questions for Darren from our committee? I am not seeing anyone else who is present at the meeting. We've got a lot of guests in the audience. I am not seeing any questions, so let's move on to our transit presentation. I know we've got Rick Ramasir here, and for BART, I don't know who is presenting, or I'm assuming, Rick, you're presenting for County Connection and with LabTech.
So this is Tim Hale with the Executive Director. I'll actually kick this one off. So,
okay.
So we, as you know, transit is really important in the 680 corridor, and our three transit operators have been really working well together and coordinating how to develop express bus service in the corridor, how to better serve BART. And so I'm really excited about this presentation. And the three transit operators, both BART, LAFT, and County Connection, have all coordinated together to develop these just outstanding presentations. And I think I'm going to turn it over to BART to kick this off, and I will share my screen.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Pamela Herhold. I'm the Assistant General Manager for Performance and Budget at BART, and actually a fellow Contra Costa County resident. So want to thank you for inviting me to present tonight. I'll run through the slides, and then I believe I turn it over to Rick next. So if we could turn to the next slide. We are now 11 months into this shelter-in-place orders, and the resulting decline in BART ridership and the impact on our service has been the single most significant change that we've ever experienced at BART. Early on in the pandemic, in the month of March, we immediately began planning to respond to the both the pandemic and the resulting change on our ridership. We reduced service, going to 30-minute headways and a 9 p.m. close for the first time in our history. We immediately began to focus on employee and rider safety, and in fact, developed a 15-step plan to welcome back our riders when they were ready to come back, letting them know in a very transparent manner what we were doing to keep the system safe. Our labor partners have been very good partners during this whole process. We quickly adopted new labor agreements in December 2020, 6 months before those expired. We in mid-March, or actually mid-May, we eliminated 700 positions that were vacant at the district at that time, and put forth a significant effort to shift our operating positions to our capital program where feasible. In fact, that is the next bullet down. That allowed us to accelerate a large number of capital projects and shaving months and weeks off of the timeline for many of our reinvestment projects, which will help us control costs and also result in less disruption to riders later on when they are coming back to the system. And last, we've been working with our local partners to lead conversations around COVID and transit, and working with our local, state, and federal advocates to advance funding measures for public transit. Next slide. Thank you. So despite the pandemic and all the challenges that we're managing, we did manage to accomplish a number of significant events in calendar year 20. We've accepted 260 Fleet of the Future rail cars for revenue service. We opened up 2 stations in Santa Clara County with our partners, Valley Transit Authority. We executed a $1.2 billion full funding grant agreement for our core capacity program last September, and subsequent to that awarded 2 critical core capacity program contracts, one for train control and the other for an option for additional vehicles. During calendar year 2020, we transitioned to Clipper only vending throughout the entire system, and now 98% of our riders use Clipper. We're also leading with MTC a fare coordination and fare integration study, and we'll be releasing some public materials related to that later this week. And then we've also made a number of advancements in BART policing. Following the events of last summer, we've launched an unarmed ambassador program to support our riders, and have established recently a progressive policing and community engagement bureau within the BART Police Department. Next slide. I'm going to have a couple slides here talking about ridership. Currently, I took a look at our data just the other day for Contra Costa County, and for the Rock Ridge through Antioch stations, it's kind of amazing that pre-pandemic, 90% of those trips that are originating out of what we call our yellow line traveled through the Caldecott Tunnel. And for those same stations, Antioch through Rock Ridge, 75% of those trips ended up in San Francisco, or two-thirds of those trips ended up in San Francisco. So, very much a East Bay to San Francisco, or at least downtown Oakland focused ridership for the Contra Costa County stations. Let's move to the next slide. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the ridership drop that we saw at BART was just simply astounding. We dropped in between March and April to just about 6 or 7% of the level that we would have expected pre-pandemic. It was a very significant and steep decline. Over the summer, early in the summer, it seemed that California was kind of bending the curve on COVID transmission, and our ridership started to pick up. However, I think we're all very aware that, we have not been successful in containing COVID, and our ridership has just leveled off at approximately 11, 12, or 13% of the levels that we would have expected had there not been a pandemic. Pre-pandemic, our ridership was averaging well over 400,000 trips on a typical weekday. And now we've settled in at about 45,000 trips on a typical weekday. So we know that the return of ridership is likely to be tied directly to the widespread distribution of vaccine and the rise in population immunity to COVID-19. And the next thing that we're very aware of, and including in our planning scenarios, is that we are not aware, we're not confident about how much of our pre-COVID ridership will return or when. A lot of it will be dependent on the downtown communities reopening, or downtown business offices reopening. And we know that we can be an enabler of economic recovery in the Bay Area by continuing to deliver safe and reliable and frequent service to our riders. Let's move to the next slide. We have some interesting data on our ridership. We've seen a significant shift in who is riding BART. So pre-pandemic, approximately 65% of our riders identified as non-white, and about a quarter of them reported household incomes of less than $50,000. And that's quite often a threshold that we use for discount-based fare programs. Now, using recent data from the fall of 2020, 75% of our riders identify as non-white, but even more significantly, over 50% of our riders report their household income of less than $50,000, so low-income riders. And what that tells us, and what we know by riding the trains and seeing who's riding the trains, is that we are carrying a significant number of essential workers throughout Contra Costa County, into Oakland, into San Francisco, as well as stations along other routes in the system. Let's move to the next slide. So one of the lessons that we learned during our work in recovery, in revising our budget, recasting our forecasts because of the pandemic, is to plan for a wide range of outcomes, and also keep our horizon, while we take a multi-year look at our horizon, also really dial in on 3 and 6 month outlooks. So what this slide shows you right here is where our ridership is right now in our current fiscal year. We're down in the 10, 12, 13% range. We're not anticipating much recovery for the next handful of months, and if the vaccination efforts of the state of California and the federal government are successful, and we start to see a large number of our Bay Area residents inoculated, we are expecting that ridership might slowly start to tick back up later on this fall. And that's what the blue line on this chart shows you. But despite that, we are carrying forward assumptions about what would happen if ridership was significantly less. What happens if we remain in the 15 to 20% range for a good portion of the next fiscal year? And probably not a lot less likely, but we are also keeping our eye on what would happen if ridership came back much more quickly. We do want to be here and be part of the solution for the region when the downtown office environments are open back up and when people are ready to get back to a more regular commute environment. Let's move to the next slide. So no surprise here, with ridership pre-pandemic covering about 2/3 of our operating expense, having such a significant loss in our ridership has created a substantial shortfall for our budgets. We are estimating right now that approximately operating deficits of approximately $500 million through fiscal year 23 before we consider the federal assistance that we've been awarded, even with our cost-cutting efforts. Our vaccine rollout is the key driver for our ridership, as I've mentioned before. But we even with a vaccine, we know that our near-term financial situation remains extremely challenging, and we expect this to linger with BART to some extent beyond fiscal year 23. We are extremely grateful for the most recent round of federal stimulus funding that was passed by DC last December. We're calling this bill CRISA for short. I'm actually forgetting off the top of my head the actual name, Coronavirus Relief. And that provided $14 billion for transit nationwide. The Bay Area has received about $1 billion, and MTC distributed the first tranche of funds to 5 operators in January, and that included $104 million for BART. So we are working with MTC and our regional operators to devise a formula to distribute the next tranche of funds, which is approximately $800 million this coming March. We are also actively keeping our eye on the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, which released a plan for a $1.9 trillion stimulus bill that would include $30 billion for transit nationwide. So we are monitoring this bill's progress and actively analyzing its potential for BART and our fellow transit operators here in the Bay Area. Let's move to the next slide. We are also, despite the pandemic, we are continuing to advance our capital priorities. Our fiscal year 21 capital budget, which is the year that we're in right now, included $1.5 billion of worth of projects in this current fiscal year. And right now we're developing our fiscal year 22 capital budget. A couple of highlight projects for us in our capital budget include the new rail cars, which hopefully some of you have had the opportunity to ride. We also have our core capacity program, which I mentioned earlier, which will increase Transbay capacity. That includes 4 major projects: our train control system, additional rail cars, a storage facility in the city of Hayward for all the rail cars in the system, and traction power improvements throughout the system. We're also actively developing in-house a next generation fare gate program to replace fare gates throughout our system, and working on various station mod projects, including El Cerrito's station mod project on our Richmond line. And in addition, we are supporting a mega regional project called Link 21, which is planning for a new bay crossing, and we're partnering with Capital Corridor on that project. And last, I want to thank Contra Costa County for their support with Measure RR. We've been able to vastly accelerate our work with RR due to our reduced service hours. We completed 19 projects under RR to date, and 57 projects are in construction right now. If we can move to the next slide. So the last thing that has been, I heard, I think Tim mentioned earlier in this meeting, silver linings, and there are a number of silver linings to come out of this pandemic. And one of those is a real active effort to coordinate among transit partners throughout the Bay Area. Our general manager, Bob Powers, along with Rick Ramasier and Michael Tree, are leaders in a weekly conversation with our general managers across all the transit agencies in the Bay Area. And as well as we have weekly or regular conversations with transit operator leaders in operations, in communications, in finance, and safety. So a number of areas where we are picking up the phone or hopping on a Zoom call and collaborating with our regional partners. We're sharing best practices, including service planning and recovery strategies and forecasts. We're coordinating on social distancing requirements, so we have a unified approach across the whole region. And we're developing common service principles that will help support service now during the pandemic and coordinate us better as we move into recovery. We're also coordinating on a couple of regional efforts that are led by MTC, including the fare integration study that I mentioned. Clipper Start, I think we have nearly 20 operators on a newly kicked off pilot for a low income fare discount program. And then of course, we talked earlier today about mobility as a service. And last, we are continuing to coordinate with our regional partners on the potential for a regional funding measure, which would include long range planning efforts. So I think that might be the last BART slide. Yes, now it's on to Rick.
There I am. All right. Always struggle to find that mute button. Thank you, Pam, and Tim, thank you for having us tonight. It's great to be with this group. My presentation will be similar to Pam's in that the transit experience, I think, in the last year has a lot of commonality to it, depending, where you are in the country. You hear the same sorts of things. And Tim, if we could move to the next slide, please, I'll kind of get going on the detail. We, in this last year, during COVID, have really sort of drilled down as to who was actually riding our system in 2019. And that was driven in large part to something that Pam alluded to. Shortly after COVID really came to us and we had to do the shelter in place and people weren't riding transit and they were staying at home. And transit operators were bleeding all kinds of revenue. MTC convened this group they call the MTC Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force to originally look at how to allocate the first round of transit support that came out of the federal government from the CARES Act. And it has now morphed into a group that's looking at how we can better create a regional connected transit system throughout the Bay Area. And in that, there's a lot of discussions that come out about the different markets across the 9-county Bay Area. And so you heard what BART has been doing in Contra Costa County and what it plans to do in the future. When we look at what County Connection's been, what we were basically don't think is a surprise, but it kind of confirms what your gut tells you. And so one of the things we looked at is what are our riders like economically versus the typical resident in the Central and South County areas. And what we found is that a County Connection rider is 4.4 times more likely not to have a car, 3.8 times more likely to live in a household with 3 or more workers in the household, which is a good indication of some transit dependency with the household, 3 more times likely to earn less than $50,000 a year, and 2.7 times likely to be between the ages of 18 and 24. Which is interesting because that then ties back to, on the right-hand side of the slide, the amount of school trips we provide to and from schools for students in Central and South County, particularly middle school kids. And this is really important to realize that during the peak, up to 30 of our 83 buses that we have on the street are geared towards meeting school bell times, which means that bus cannot meet a BART train. And why that's important is it's a balancing act we have to do with our partners to serve these different markets. And there is a big interest and has been a big interest in the years in making sure that there's regional connectivity and good first and last mile connections to BART. That is why Innovate 680 in many ways is really important, because it's seeking different ways besides a standard bus to get people to and from BART for those trips that might actually work better than what we do. And in fact, then frees up our resources to do things we're really good at, which includes getting kids to and from school. The other thing that we use this slide for is to remind folks who have an eye towards improving the regional transit trip that we do a pretty good job, and we want to make sure that we are still able to do so as we move in a more regional direction in providing local trips. 76% of our riders begin and end their trip within the so-called County Connection service area. And those are likely to be transit-dependent essential workers, as we've learned during COVID-19, taking essential trips to work in grocery stores and government buildings and other areas where they're providing essential services, healthcare workers on the lower end of the spectrum. Perhaps not the doctors, but perhaps the nurses, the orderlies, the folks that do the things behind the scenes that keep hospitals going and doctors' offices going. And then also we touch on our funding. Again, it's notable that when you look at our two biggest fund sources besides fares and grants, that TDA and STA, which both flow through MTC, and MTC has the ability to deny our claims or approve our claims, 62% of our operating revenues in normal times goes through MTC. So we are extremely dependent on our relationship with those folks and those partners. Next slide, please. So the COVID hits, and then we had a very interesting experience here at County Connection. The shelter in place is announced, I believe, effective March 16th. That weekend, I don't remember the date, on Sunday, I get a call from the woman who ostensibly runs our paratransit program. She now does a lot more. We had to reclassify her in the middle of the pandemic. She was terribly underpaid and underclassified for what she took on her own initiative relative to COVID-19 and our response. And so that Sunday call from her alerted me that the county wanted to get on the phone with the transit operators Monday morning, the county health department and the county EOC, to discuss what they expected us to do during COVID. And when we first heard what they wanted us to do, my initial response was, we're not trained to do that. We're not prepared to do those things. So we entered an agreement with the county. They came out and they trained our workers. And you can see in the picture there, there's a paratransit operator who works for Transdev, our contractor, with what look like things you normally would hope would be full of beer or soda. They're actually not. They're kits to protect the driver who is going to be handling COVID positive customers that the county is helping to get to various places. Either they get a COVID test or to go isolate, because wherever they live, they can't isolate. They might live in a two-bedroom apartment with 4 other people. They might be homeless. They might live in a congregate living center where we know the COVID ran through those places in a really sad way early in the pandemic. All these folks were taking our services, our paratransit services, on specialized trips that the county directed us under. And we had the capacity because our normal customers for ADA paratransit service and senior service, those folks were staying home because they're vulnerable populations. The places they normally go to were closed, and they were strongly advised by their doctors to stay home. So you can see the various things we've done since that time. We now do Meals on Wheels. We deliver meals to seniors who are homebound. Normally those meals were delivered by volunteers. Those volunteers often are seniors. They were told to stay home. We have participated in helping deliver food for the Contra Costa Food Bank, school lunches for program for low-income students who were not going to school, they're learning from home. They weren't able to access their free lunch, so we brought their lunch to their home. And then we did some senior meal deliveries in San Ramon. That stuff still goes on today, and it's been a very rewarding experience. It has allowed us to keep our Transdev employees employed and on the payroll and not lay them off, which is important for them, but not only for us, because when ADA paratransit demand comes back as the COVID wave subsides and the vaccines get out there, we want those folks ready to go. Hiring drivers in this economic environment is very difficult to do. They're hard to find. They're hard to train. And then the DMV has a tremendous backlog on certifying them once they are trained to go out into revenue service. So this has been a win-win. Next slide. On fixed route, our ridership dropped like you heard from Bart, not nearly as dramatic. And I think that's because you see more essential workers and transit-dependent people have to go to work during COVID taking local transit. But our ridership has dropped quite a bit right now. We're at about 50% our normal rate on the weekends and about at 30% of our normal ridership rate on the weekdays. What's interesting about that is you would think the weekends would have dropped at a greater level, but our weekend ridership has always been about getting transit-dependent people around the county to their jobs on the weekends, such as grocery stores and whatnot. We did some things to our buses to make sure they were as clean as possible relative to COVID-19. We improved the fresh air uptake and did some things like opening windows, for example, and using anti-fogger daily to make sure that the air quality was good on the bus. We moved to what's called a MERV 7 filter, which is a higher level than what we used to have, a bit more expensive, but a bit better in terms of filtering out particles such as COVID-19. We suspended fares in late March and did not reinstitute fares until November 1st to promote backdoor boarding, which reduced the amount of time the passenger and the driver were within 6 feet of each other. Once we did all the upgrades to the buses with the plexiglass driver shields that we now have, and the driver's sort of enclosed in there, and PPE became readily available throughout the community, both for our employees and our passengers, and a number of other things behind the scenes. Our employees felt comfortable collecting the fares again, and so we moved to collect the fares effective November 1st. We are now doing front door boarding. And one of the trade-offs that our operators enjoy with that fare collection is when they were free, we were having what we like to call the all-day excursion joyrider. They get on a bus, they never get off, it's free, they ride all day, and they tend to be people that sometimes make our drivers nervous relative to their long-term health interests. So they were actually very pleased that we reinstituted fare collection here on November 1st. And I want to say, while I'm talking about our employees, our unions too have been very good to work with. We have been meeting with them daily, weekly, on all kinds of things. And we've asked them to do a lot of difficult things, and they've been very agreeable. They also came to us and we came to them. We, like BART, have extended our labor contracts for 1 year beyond the expiration date. We both recognize that trying to negotiate a labor contract during COVID and the unpredictability of it all was going to be very, very difficult for both management and the workers. At a time we're already very stressed. And most of my senior managers are already putting in 50 to 55 hours a week without labor negotiations. So that would have been not a good atmosphere for to negotiate a good contract that's fair to both sides. And we rolled our contracts for 1 additional year to hopefully negotiate those contracts after COVID's behind us and our economic future is more certain. Next slide. Like BART, we are keeping a strong eye on our financial projections. These change weekly. This graphic that our CFO provided to our board of directors a month ago is already out of date. The main thing I will say is the bad news is we've lost a fair amount of fare revenue relative to our size, not nearly as dramatic as BART. We are not nearly as dependent on fares as BART is, but we are projected to lose between 10 and 12 million in fare revenue over the next 3 years, including this current year. Luckily, the CARES Act, which was the first act that brought money to transit, has covered a great deal of those losses. The other good news is that our sales tax in Contra Costa County is up. Our residents are buying a lot of stuff through the mail. And so initially, we feared that our sales tax losses due to COVID-19 would be horrific. And we were really scrambling on how would we cope with that. That being said, because of the fare loss revenue and the unpredictability of where we are headed, our board is slated to cement what has been a slow fare service reduction we've carried out through this year later this spring. And what we did with our service is our planning department created what we call a hierarchy of service. And we looked at each run as it equates with a driver's piece of work. And we ordered them from first to last in importance based on a number of criteria that lean particularly heavy towards transit dependency and the essential worker. And so early on in the pandemic, when we had a lot of workers out, we cut more into that hierarchy. And it's sort of stabilized in June. And really what's left not being run are our school trippers, because school's out of session, and particularly commuter trips, particularly to Bishop Ranch and San Ramon. So if our board approves this, we will cement the levels of service we're down to, which will then give us the freedom to introduce service slowly over time this summer and fall as things open up, as schools open up, as maybe people start coming back to Bishop Ranch, and as revenues allow. And right now, we're cautiously optimistic that our revenues will allow us to put some of those trips back. The other thing it does is it allows us to have a reserve of drivers available for when we start to get demand for services that can't be met and can't be met while we honor social distancing without adding more buses. So let me talk about social distancing on a bus for a few minutes, because this is probably not well known outside of the board members of County Connection that serve on this PAC. And that is, we determined together with the county that the maximum amount of people we could put on a 40-foot bus during COVID was 12 people. Normally a bus will fit 40 to 50 people. We have buses in the Monument Corridor in particular during non-COVID times where those buses will fill up. And those are transit dependent folks normally, and they're often essential workers. As those people go to work at higher levels later on this year, we will likely run into more situations where we get 12 people on a bus quickly and we have to send out another bus, or we're going to be leaving people stranded. So by using our hierarchy of service, we're able to have resources available to move around the county as those needs pop up, because those buses aren't dedicated to any one line. And that's part of the innovative things we've learned during this time that we hope to be able to carry forward as we move forward, is the idea of having buses be more flexible and not necessarily dedicated to a schedule in every single case. The other challenge this is going to present, perhaps sooner rather than later, because we can't really get a good handle on what the schools are doing. They seem to be shifting daily on us right now, is if they open up suddenly and everybody goes back and we have to social distance at 6 feet on the bus, we are not going to be able to carry the school loads we carried before COVID started unless we violate those social distancing principles. When we've talked to the county about this, the county has been very understanding, but non-committal. I will share with this group that in Europe, where the COVID rates have actually been lower than America, they allow more people per transit vehicle than we are allowing in this country. They do not require people in Europe to be 6 feet apart on a transit bus, but they do require them to wear a mask. And the new administration has issued a federal order that everyone must wear a mask on public transit. So while we have been doing that in the Bay Area, and as part of our joint healthy plan that we developed with BART and LAFTA and others, we now have the federal government behind that, and we can use that to reinforce in an educational way with our riders that you got to wear a mask. So we'll continue to work on that and try to educate our healthcare partners that there are other places in the world where they're allowing more people on the vehicles, the transit vehicles, and their COVID rates aren't going up. So that's something we have to work on coming out of this. Next slide, please. I've talked ridership. I think, Tim, let's just kind of move on from this one. And again, all of us, I think, are going to talk about this tonight because this is such a front and center issue. As Pam alluded to, there are regular weekly meetings with the general managers, with the heads of the planning departments, with the CFOs, with the operation folks, the public relations folks. We are working hard and putting a lot of hours in and working on these things, such as sharing best practices on how we can make our services more connected and break down these barriers that are institutional in nature, working on the integrated fare study, working on the Clipper Start, just a slew of things, really. And it's been an awful lot of work, but I think we're setting ourselves up for a much better system when the riders come back. And this effort's been really, I think, beneficial and rewarding. Next slide, please. Okay, let's see, I think I got one after this one. So as we come out of this, I talked about the transportation to schools and that challenge. We are continuing to work to seek financial stability. As we look at our finances, as they sort of start to stabilize, we'll have a better sense of what we can afford to operate and how we're going to move forward. But again, I think this hierarchy of service that we've been informally using, and we hope the board will formally cement versus through a service restructuring that's formal that in a month or two will continue to help us meet those financial stability goals that we have. The final thing I'll talk about is Bishop Ranch, because I think it's so central to the corridor. We have been in regular contact now in communication with the leadership at Sunset Development, and those have been very good talks that we've had. We are, in fact, this is not well known, out of contract with them. You may or may not be aware that there's been a long-term contract between Sunset and County Connection to provide shuttles from Walnut Creek and Dublin BART into the ranch. The contract expired right before COVID hit, and we were renegotiating that contract and getting prepared to kind of bring that back to our board and get an approval when COVID hit and their employees all went home to work. So we've been using this downtime to kind of reevaluate the relationship and the different approaches to service. And integral to that is the work with Innovate 680, because that offers a lot of opportunities. The old way that we have served the ranch, for example, is we send a bus down the freeway and it gets from Walnut Creek BART to the exit, Bollinger or Crow, in about 15 to 18 minutes, maybe quicker if there's less traffic. And then the bus spends just as much time, if not more, circulating the ranch, getting people to the 15 buildings. If we can create a project, and I think this is part of the thinking that's going into Innovate 680, and I know there's a lot of interest at Sunset, where we run the buses to a central point in the ranch, and then people get off and there's a vehicle waiting for it, whether it be an old school transit shuttle or a futuristic autonomous shuttle. Then that vehicle takes it to the front door of the office that person works in. We can, as County Connection, run almost twice as much service with the same resource in the corridor while folks are taking these shuttles around the ranch. And so that is just a concrete example of the work that Tim's been doing, how it can lead to something that I think is really exciting and beneficial to the customer and actually creates great efficiencies in delivering the transit service network. So we'll see where we end up with Bishop Ranch at the end of the day. They have no idea when they talk to us when these employees are coming back. They think some of them may start coming back this summer. They think it might be the fall. Some may not come back till next year in 2022. So that will guide when we reintroduce additional services to the ranch versus what we have now, which is a skeleton level of service. Next slide, Tim. And finally, I just wanted to talk about how we at County Connection see what's going on in the corridor and how we think we fit in. We want to partner with 2CTA as we have been. We see transit as the backbone in the 680 corridor that connects to all of the different projects that are going to happen with Innovate 680. And one of the things I like about Innovate 680 is, I've been working at this agency, as some of you know, for a fairly long time. And we've never quite figured out how to efficiently serve those hard to serve neighborhoods where, people struggle to get to the BART station, or they struggle to get to a, express bus station, and we struggle to serve them efficiently and effectively. Innovate 680 and its comprehensive plan have the promise to kind of solve that problem and make the transit backbone much more effective. We are partnering with LAFTA and Solano to create an express bus service. It says Solano. I think that when it's all said and done, it's going to probably start at the Martinez Amtrak. And the idea is to have a one-seat ride that's branded as an express bus service where the rider doesn't know if it's County Connection or LAFTA or Solano. It's the same bus, the same color, the same logo, no matter who's driving the service, same fares. And they would be able to ride from the Amtrak station in Martinez, express style, down to Dublin BART, and then sometime later on down to Diridon in San Jose. It would have limited stops. So there'd be stops at 1 or 2 BART stations, Bishop Ranch, and then Dublin BART, and possibly the Ace train station later on. LAFTA has led a separate study. They received a grant, and Michael Tree will probably talk about that, so I won't say too much about it. It's almost done, and it recommends that service be implemented, and it should compete well for state funding that's available through Cal STA in this corridor. The other thing I'll say about this that's not on the slide, and this is, well, it is at the bottom, I guess. This is very preliminary. Michael Tree and I are talking about doing a joint project with County Connection and LAFTA with hydrogen fuel cell buses in the 680 corridor between Dublin and Walnut Creek. And we would brand this as a special service. It wouldn't be branded as a County Connection or a LAFTA service. It would be branded in a way that would connote to the customer an express service that's using the latest technology to get them from A to B in a quick way. There's going to be a meeting with some of the board members from both agencies and Gillig to kind of discuss this conceptually later on this month. And again, this is a project I feel will compete very, very well with state funding for these kinds of projects. Why hydrogen fuel cell? As we have experimented with 8 battery electric buses now in Walnut Creek over the last 6 years, one of the things that is apparent, at least to me, is in the interim anyway, over the next 15 years or so, range is still going to be a challenge for battery electric buses, particularly for express buses, long haul services that have a long end to end. The hydrogen fuel cell bus has an advantage over that, and the hydrogen fuel cell bus is coming down in price to be competitive with the battery electric bus price. They're almost equal now. The other thing about hydrogen fuel cell that's critical is it takes up a lot less space in terms of storage and fueling. The County Connection bus yard is not equipped to handle charging more than a handful of electric buses. We don't have the space to expand, and finding another bus yard in Central County would be a daunting task in terms of how we finance it, how we raise the revenue, and frankly, going through an approval process in a community to build a bus yard. LAFTA has excess space that Michael can talk about, and that provides an advantage to this project as well. So the one last thing I'll mention that I think is important to the 680 corridor is we are doing a one pilot demo with all of the providers in Contra Costa County on a 1-seat paratransit ride. This has been a complaint for years of folks who rely on these services, is that if they're living in Antioch and they've got to go to Walnut Creek Kaiser, they are often have been made to switch paratransit vehicles at a BART station between Tri-Delta Transit and County Connection, as one example. This 1-year pilot, really what it does is if you're traveling across those sort of artificial transit boundaries and you get on one of our paratransit programs, you'll remain on that vehicle till you get to your destination. You will not have to transfer between paratransit vehicles. We're very excited about that. And then the last thing on paratransit is LAFTA and County Connection are almost ready to introduce, probably in April, a paratransit program where behind the scenes we share the same contractor, the same contract manager. They operate our services as one, but they honor the different operating rules and board policies about who gets to ride the service and what fares they pay while operating the service as one. And that'll be a 1-year pilot as well. And I've probably taken up more time than I should have. So I think, Tim, with that, I'm going to thank you for the time. And if there are any questions after Michael's presentation, be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Rick. And we've got one more presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Rick before we go on, in case you have a County Connection specific? I'm not seeing any, their virtual hands. Okay, so let's go on and hear all about what LAFTA is doing.
All right. Well, listen, it's great to be here this evening, and I certainly want to recognize Tim Hale. When I came to LAFTA about 6 years ago, I had an innovative flair. And so I really admire what what Tim and his agency are doing with innovation, in particular on the 680. And I think you've heard just a glimpse of the way that we're working with County Connection. I mean, I really admire Rick. He's not only a regional leader here with public transit, but he's a state leader. And it's been amazing to see his leadership during COVID, in particular with the other transit operators in the region. Next. All right, so I'm going to go through my slide deck pretty quickly. I'll just tidy my presentation. A lot of these slides perhaps are duplicative in theme at least. But I did want to show this slide. This is the entire LAFTA Transit Authority, 14 employees. We contract out everything we do. So we have about 100 drivers providing fixed route service and paratransit service, and a handful of great mechanics and dispatchers and so on, but they are all contracted out. Two main contracts, MV, and then a company called MTM doing our paratransit. I'll just say these guys are flexible, and they're really a joy to work with. Next. So these are some of the things that we've been up to over the last 4 or 5 years. In 2016, the board really made a decision to get more performance out of the bus system to increase the ridership. Long story short, we revamped the routes, and ridership has been steadily increasing ever since we have done that. We were pretty bummed to see COVID, to say the least, and see the effects of COVID. We had just been enjoying just some really steady growth on the system without increasing the revenue hours. If you wanted to just know in a nutshell who are the riders on the LAFTA system, you have a third of them, about 30%, who are students, a third of them who you'd kind of categorize as transit dependent. This is their way of getting around, and there's no other options. And then about a third of our riders are commuters. We initiated in 2017 a partnership with Uber and Lyft. It was originally just in Dublin. It is now, during COVID, we took it to, it's called Go Tri-Valley, so it's system-wide in the Livermore, Dublin, and Pleasanton area. It's been a popular program. The ridership has steadily grown. It's a shared ride program, so you need to select Uber Pool or Lyft Line and give those two companies an opportunity to match your ride. And we pay half the ride cost, up to $5. And so the only caveat there is during COVID, they haven't been offering the shared ride, obviously, but that program allows us to have a lot of coverage within our system. And the average subsidy is about $3, which is about half the subsidy that we pay for on even our most popular routes. And then the other things we've done over the last couple of years that have really contributed to making the system get really busy is we've worked with the college here in the service area. They actually went to a vote as students to put in place a student transit pass program, and it had a 93% approval rating, I think it was. So long story short, if you go to the college, you've got instant access to our bus system with a pass. We've also worked to make sure that every middle and high school student in Livermore has a pass, thanks to Measure BB, and that's been extended even into Dublin and Pleasanton. We've been working with a shared autonomous vehicle project that I really think has a lot of promise in the future. I think I've got a picture on a slide a little bit later on, but long story short, we're working towards getting that into phase 2, where it would go travel about a mile to a business park where the Ross headquarters is located and the Zeiss Innovation Center is located. So a high density business park about a mile from the BART station, and we plan to operate high frequency in between those two destinations with a mobility hub at each. And then we are currently working in collaboration with the County of Alameda to plan and construct a parking garage next to the Dublin Pleasanton BART station. And then finally, the administration there at LAFTA is the administration for the Valley Link Rail project that's being planned. And I see Karen Stepper this evening, and she has served on that board for years. And so it's a project that's moving quickly. Next. Hey, Tim, you can go to the next slide. You can tell my marketing director put these together. So real quick, yeah, you've heard of most of these things. These are the things we did with the COVID safety measures when those days of March hit us, and COVID was initially a big problem. We immediately started fogging the buses, and if you've never seen what a fogger does to the buses, that's a picture on that slide. It just really, for 4 hours, we fog every bus, and that created quite a change in the way we maintain the vehicles and the way our maintenance crews work. And then throughout the day, the operators sanitize high touch areas, such as your rails going up and down the stairs into the buses. The masks were required. We went fare free. The rear door boarding, you've heard about this evening. We really started adhering to distancing guidelines, which meant that when there were really more than 10 people on a bus, we were dispatching additional buses to the route to handle the demand. Hand sanitizers, we put them on all the buses or at the transit centers. We installed a barrier, we called it the germ garden, between the operators and the passengers. And as Rick mentioned, we went to the MERV 7 filters and popped open the hatches on the bus to circulate the air at a higher rate. And then finally, Transit app, the app that we use here at LAFTA, started to have real-time bus passenger loading information available. So you could literally see with your bus coming to your stop whether it was full or half full or not full at all. Next. So this is a slide that's real familiar tonight. The only thing I'll say here is that really the riders that remain on the LAFTA system based on our surveys is really the transit dependent, and many of them essential workers. The students, obviously, were not running any school routes, and the commuters disappeared immediately off the system. Next. So this is the impacts of COVID on the LAFTA system. That's a lot of spaghetti on the right in the picture, but those are the routes that we were running pre-COVID. And so we reduced the local routes. We eliminated all 3 of the express routes, including our Route 70X, which goes from the Dublin Pleasanton BART station up to the BART station in Walnut Creek and the BART station in Pleasant Hill. We kept the rapid routes, but we reduced the frequency of them from 15-minute frequency all day to 30. And those are the routes that really hit a lot of the transit dependent housing and areas, as well as your hospitals and your essential services within the service area. So we really looked at social equity as we were looking to see what routes we would modify or drop. And then of course, there's no school routes. Next. So I put a couple of slides here on kind of lessons learned during COVID. Our board gave us the leeway to make quick decisions. So all of the things you saw on how we reacted were done literally without a board meeting, and the board's been supportive, and so have the riders. We did a survey, and we had no negative comments made on what we did to the routes and what we can the level that we currently have with them. We really took a big, strong position on just protecting our operators, communication. We updated our website daily and really got heavily involved with the Blue Ribbon Task Force. And I think that's where Rick Ramasir really has provided some fantastic leadership in the Bay Area. But, you know, we got a chance to look around and see what others were doing on a daily basis there. Next. So here's a couple of slides on opportunities moving forward, kind of how we view things at LAFTA as we turn a corner and the vaccinations ramp up and hopefully we see COVID, at least from a pandemic level, in the rearview mirror soon. We may not return all the routes that were eliminated during the pandemic shutdown. At least the board has indicated that they would not mind evaluating critically the routes. I think our board really wants to focus on frequent, convenient service in key corridors with the buses. And 85% of our bus routes end at a BART station. And so it gives you an idea of just the sheer volume of people leaving our service area every day to work elsewhere in the region. We have just had great success in taking advantage of strategic partnerships with the TNCs and also looking at microtransit. Again, there's a picture of the shared autonomous vehicle that we're hoping to get into phase 2 and really explore passenger service with. But trying to be efficient and finding the right solution for the problem or for the opportunity, better said, in the service area. Next. There we go. This is really, a lot of these things were covered by Tim, and certainly Rick's heavily involved, but we want to continue to develop technology, in particular the Transit app. We've got a couple of different things Transit app is working on just for LAFTA, which I'm sure will be available to others in the transit industry. We're certainly encouraging all of our riders to take advantage of touchless payment in using the Clipper and Clipper card and mobility as a service applications in our service area. That's a picture, by the way, of the Transit app. If you're ever wondering what it looks like to a rider who is basically trying to figure out when the bus is coming and if it's crowded or not, you can see right on the icon of the bus there that particular bus at that moment is not crowded. So anyway, it's an idea of just a technology that becomes available that allows it to be much easier to ride public transit. Next. And I think this might be one of my end slides here, but you know, looking for opportunities moving forward in addition to innovation. You know, we've made a big deal in public transit in the Bay Area through the Bay Area Healthy Plan and just through a lot of marketing at each agency about how we're cleaning the buses and, in fact, how clean they really are. You know, that's a nice opportunity to shift and continue to rebrand the advantages of a new cleanliness on the public transit system. Also, rebranding, certainly on efforts that are being made. Rick made mention of the hydrogen bus project. We're hopeful to partner with County Connection on for the 680. And, you know, certainly rebranding with the public, in addition to having a clean bus, but also having zero emission in the near future is a huge opportunity for public transit. Next. Oh, so let's see here. Oh, and I would just reiterate what has been shared tonight about the Blue Ribbon Task Force. I think there are continued opportunities for public transit to operate and to you know, have more collaboration moving forward. I've never seen a moment in time in my 30-year history of public transit where transit operators collaborate so closely, so often as over the last, you know, eight or so months. And so that's a huge opportunity moving forward. I'm not sure the answer is consolidation as much as it is working together closely and through MOUs and just partnerships, creating a more seamless system for the region. And that includes getting fares more consistent, the schedules and the transfers to make it the public transit system even more easy to use. So I think, Tim, that was it on my end.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Michael. Both you and Rick gave us very, very comprehensive reports of some amazing things you're doing. And several of us do serve on the County Connection Board of Directors, and I think we all learned a few new things. So let's start questions first. We have one from Karen Stepper, and then followed by Karen will be Sue Nowak. Karen, unmute yourself because I can't read your lips.
You're right. Thank you. I came on board with Bob McCleary on CCTA, and I was always, I never could understand why all these buses were all separate, and this one went these few blocks and the next system went the next, and neither shall they talk. I've never heard the kind of information like I've heard tonight. It is so encouraging, and it's really exciting what all the bus operators this last discussion had. All the things that you're cooperating on right now are making a huge difference and really is the future. So thank you for that.
Great. Okay, Sue.
Well, mine actually went back to BART. I know, I sit on the County Connection board as quite a few others here do. So I know about, quite a lot of the pivoting that had to be done there, and the buses have a little bit more flexibility. But when it comes to BART, I'm assuming that as people go back to work, there's going to be a bit more flexibility on hours and things like that. And having ridden BART for many years, commuting into San Francisco, that certain time that I would never want to be on a BART car was when I had to go home. And do you expect the pattern of people using BART to be quite a bit different? And how much flexibility can you add to your system to address the potential varying levels of riders to keep that spreading, to keep that social distancing?
Absolutely. That's a very good question. And we have been having active conversations with some of the major employers in downtown San Francisco and encouraging them to be receptive to flexible work hours for their employees when they're back in the office. So, and then we have the ability to, right now we're running at 30-minute headways, and we're using data, watching our ridership data very closely. Every time you tap your Clipper card going in and out of the fare gate, we can track those riders en masse and determine where we need to add new trains at a 15-minute interval to support, to alleviate train crowding right now. So if you're riding the lines in from Bay Point into San Francisco, you'll see that during the morning and evening commute, we have extra trains added to support that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions by any members here? Oh, Carlin, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I also have some BART related questions, and I appreciate all the presentations too, to kind of see how all the transit systems are trying to work even more closely together. So two questions that I have as we prepare for people to hopefully start going back onto the trains. Can you share with us what you're doing to try to reassure the public that, we still do have people that are riding the train, some of the unsheltered members of the Bay Area, and they don't necessarily wear masks or use hand sanitizer. So what are you doing to reassure the public that, the trains are going to be safe and clean? And connected to that, I know that there's this fare gate installation that you're talking about to address fare evasion, but I'm just wondering the timeline when that's finally going to make it to BART stations in Contra Costa County, because it always seems like it takes a long time for us to receive some of the things that happen in Alameda and San Francisco counties.
Oh, absolutely. So very good questions. I think that maybe Michael Tree or Rick touched upon the health dashboard. There, all the transit operators in the Bay Area are surveying, evaluating and monitoring the service, including our riders wearing face masks. There's a handful of different indicators that we're tracking, and that's being posted, I think, on MTC's website. Maybe Rick or Michael could nod their head and that information's out there for the public to evaluate. And I think that BART's compliance is somewhere around 95% for observed people wearing face masks. But we are very aware that, there are people on the trains that, are not what we call they're non-destination riders. And so we have invested our resources and our training efforts in ambassadors to help encourage and move these folks off the system, and along with our police department. And we have a new progressive policing unit, which will try to get these folks off the system and not getting back in. And then that leads me to the fare gates. And we're working on a funding plan for the fare gates right now. BART has seed money. We put aside about $35 million for design and implementation for these fare gates. It's a $90 million project overall. We're identifying more internal funds for BART that we plan to put aside next year. And we're working with the counties to identify county level funds that could help support the new fare gate change to the counties. And it's a project that is actually fairly easily staged. So should we be successful in working with Contra Costa County to identify a share of funds in Contra Costa County, that's where we're going to start first on our fare gate. So we have a funding plan. We've broken up the fare gates by county and allocated the cost in that same manner.
Well, and to that point, Pamela, are you talking about the county or the transportation authority? I'm just curious what sort of county funding you would be expecting to pay for fare gates.
Forgive me, transportation authority.
Okay, I'm just wondering as a county supervisor.
If the county wants to contribute, we're here.
not as much in our wheelhouse, but I was just sort of figuring out what the nexus was, and first I'd heard about it. Okay.
Sorry, no, I'm using BART shorthand there.
No. County, we often do as well for 2CDA. Okay, other questions? Anyone from the audience who would like to, these are all great presentations, and I know it's getting a little late and we've still got quite a few other presentations. So I think I'm going to move us right along. Oh, Robert, before I move on, please go ahead.
I'm just gonna make a comment because during this COVID, nightmare, progress has still been moving forward. A lot of us have been talking about it. Many of us sit on the County Connection Board. Now we're partnering with LAFTA. Haven't personally met Michael Tree, but I know there's a great deal of mutual respect between County Connection and LAFTA. Tim Hale, Randy Urasaki, all moving, great ideas forward. We just started talking about bus on the shoulders, and here we are having presentations where it looks like it's going to be a viable alternative on I-680. And I really appreciate the partnerships that we've all created here over this last year, very difficult year. And we never stop progressing forward, and I appreciate that. And I'm really proud of working with each of you. Tim, congratulations on being at CCTA. And thank you for all of us for thinking outside of the box. It's necessary if we're going to reinvent ourselves and get us back to a transportation agency that everybody wants to get back on the buses. We have to think outside of the box. And I really do appreciate that during this difficult time.
Oh, thank you, Robert. Great sentiments that I think we all share. Okay, seeing no other questions, I'm going to move us right on, and we're going to see how quickly Rebecca and Lindsay can do their presentation. Don't you love being in our 2 hour? We're 2 hours and 7 minutes into the presentation. So Lindsay, to our meeting, Lindsay and Rebecca, you're going to be talking to us about behavioral science and public engagement update.
Yes, good evening, committee members. I'm Lindsay Willis, the Director of External Affairs for the Authority. I know we've been sitting for a long time. I was going to ask you all to stand up and give me like 10 jumping jacks to get the blood moving again. So feel free to stand up and stretch. We're going to try to keep our update pretty brief this evening about our behavior science study and public engagement activities. Just giving you an update from the last meeting. As many of you are aware, the 680 effort is really unique in many ways. And that extends to the way we're trying to engage with the public and understand how they use the corridor and the thought process behind that. And so part of our public engagement effort includes conducting a behavior science study. And as you've seen from some of the previous presentations, there are many sources of data available about the 680 corridor. We have origin and destination data, transit data, average speeds, etc. But data doesn't always tell us the whole story. It can tell us what happens, but not necessarily the why. And that's what we're really trying to get at through this behavior science effort. As Tim mentioned, we're aiming for mode shift on this project, and we need that in order to meet some of the greenhouse gas and vehicle miles traveled goals that we have. And in order to achieve that, we're really looking at how we can design different elements of this project to remove the barriers or the challenges for some of the travelers on this corridor who want to get to their destination by a means other than a single occupant vehicle. So we recently completed a survey of residents along the whole 680 corridor in Contra Costa in January, and we plan to come back and give you a full update on those survey results at your next meeting. This evening, however, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Krowak with Convey Incorporated, who's heading up our public engagement efforts for Innovate 680. And she's going to give you a little sneak peek, a little snack of some of those survey results and update you on some of our recent activities. So Tim, if you want to advance to the next slide, maybe the next two to the first slide, Rebecca, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. That was a perfect intro. And that's right, we're gonna give you a little teaser tonight, but lots more to come on this. And my first slide here is just a quick recap. Root Solutions is a behavior science team that's doing the study with us, and we have three main deliverables, and I think I covered these before, but just a quick recap. A landscape analysis report was conducted on several relevant topics, and those reports show us gaps in research because it looks at all available research and sort of shows us what we still need to get. And from that, we work on behavior drivers analysis. And that's a really fancy way of saying surveys and focus groups and things like that, which will then supplement our landscape analysis. And from those two steps, we're going to come up with some interventions and recommendations for how to make Innovate 680, all the projects within it, the best that they can be, and also how to encourage mode shift, which, as Lindsay said, is our ultimate goal. Next slide. So just quickly, we have done several landscape analysis reports, as I mentioned, and the last one was completed this past January 2021. We're going to be finalizing all of these. There's still a lot to be done and a lot that we can learn from these, but these reports did shape our user analysis survey, which we issued this past November. So Tim, if you could advance. We created a survey and distributed it to about 50,000 residents in Contra Costa along the corridor. So we're calling them neighbors of the corridor. And from the survey requests, we reached our goal of 1,500 responses. We actually got 1,544 responses that covered every neighborhood along the corridor. And another really successful piece of the survey was that 1,000 people that out of that 1,500, 1,000 people agreed to be contacted in the future for future research. And of that 1,000, 950 people agreed to link this survey data to future travel data. So that's going to give us a lot of insight in the future as Innovate 680 proceeds. Next slide. So just very quickly, this was an online survey, but a print version was available upon request. It took about 25 minutes to complete, and we covered a multitude of topics. And this gave us all the information that we're going to need, I think, to really come up with some great recommendations. Next slide. So just a quick snapshot. I have a few, I'm going to add to the bar chart party tonight that we're having and give you just a few little tidbits from the survey. So first of all, pre-COVID use of the 680 corridor. What this really confirmed is just how popular a corridor it is, which I don't think any of us doubted. And you can see 41% use it every day or nearly every day, which is a large portion of our respondents. Next slide. The preferred mode choice, probably not surprisingly, was personal vehicle and taking that vehicle alone. So that was 91%. Next slide. We asked a lot of questions about pre-travel, pre-COVID travel, post-COVID travel, and we asked the likelihood of travelers to return to their previous habits in the future. And you can see that the majority of them have some likelihood of doing that, but we also note that there is that 16% that maybe doesn't want to return to their previous travel habits. And that could work really nicely with our 10% goal of mode shift. So that could be a key target audience for us in the future. Next slide. Of the people that are not likely to return to, or likely to return to their previous habits, we also asked if people just generally are interested in driving less. And this was very encouraging because, as you can see, 68% of respondents said that they are interested, but maybe they just don't know what's available to them. So we'll be looking into that a lot more deeply as well. Next slide. When asked why they want to drive less, most people feel that there's an environmental impact that they can help with, and that's a great incentive. Also, people don't want to sit in traffic, and so some of these answers that have these high percentages could really guide our messaging in the future to encourage mode shift. Next slide. So we're really excited. I just have a few more slides here to take a additional deep dive into the survey response data. As Lindsay said, we'll come back to at the next meeting and share a lot more information with you. And from that, we'll also decide some additional more focused research, and then finally develop and implement some recommendations for the program. Next slide. So now just a really quick 2-slide outreach update. First of all, we did make some significant website updates. The one I want to highlight here is that we did add some behavior science stats on the homepage, right there where Tim's moving his cursor. And then also, you might recall that we had some nice materials from the scoping meeting from the Express Lane Completion Project. And we created a page that's now hosting that information so that the public can revisit it at any time. Next slide. And then finally, we did finalize our second edition of the Innovate 680 newsletter. That is now available on the Innovate 680 website and will be pushed out via social media later this week. And I think that concludes my presentation.
Well, that's wonderful. Great presentation. I appreciate the brevity given the late hour. Any questions by committee members? And we really look forward to a more comprehensive report next month. I really found intriguing the number of people that really want alternatives, both for environmental reasons and then also a lot of us just don't like to sit in traffic. So we're really putting ourselves in a prime opportunity to roll some of these things out as we get back to work. Okay, questions, comments from any committee members? I am not seeing any questions, comments from anyone who is present. And I am not seeing any virtual hands up there. So we are going to move right on to our next presentation. And this is going to be presented by both Carl Hawk and by Richard Galvin on the program approach for Senate Bill 743. So let's see what you're going to do with SB 743.
Tim's got his hand up.
Oh, Tim, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. So, Madam Chair, I just want to seek interest of the committee of this topic and whether you want to cover it tonight or we can push it to the April Policy Advisory Committee. Just want to seek everyone's interest just based on the time.
I'm inclined to push it off just because we've had a lot of information already. We've had a lot of information tonight. And if it's not time sensitive, I think I prefer to move it to the other one, the next meeting.
Perfect. All right, we'll move right along to the next agenda item, which is
okay. And thank you for Richard. Thank you for being prepared, all of you. It's not you. It's just we're gonna just want to keep moving the agenda along and give you more time next month to talk about it. Okay, so you're going to take us then. The next one is informational. Liz Justison and Danielle Stanislaus, and they're going to talk about the tax concept of operations development and transit-related policy issues, which is also a mouthful. And hopefully you had great examples by Lindsay and Rebecca. Can you compress it like they did? Now, hopefully you're not talking because we can't hear you. But otherwise I could make up a script. Okay.
Nope, it's okay. Liz, when you get your audio, you just let me know. This is Danielle Stanislaus with Emergent Transportation Concepts, a part of the consultant team. You guys have heard from me before. I serve as your stakeholder engagement manager, as well as a part of the system management team. So we're just going to step you through some brief slides.
I'm back.
Oh, great.
I've been unmuted by the powers of that be. Hi, everybody. So this is Liz Justison. I am the systems manager lead on the program team. And we just want to give you an update and bring a couple of key policy issues that are emerging as part of our development of the concept of operations for the 680, the larger 680 program concept of operations. Next slide, Tim. So this looks very complicated, but what this is our system architecture map. So Tim had that great video at the very beginning, and it looks very easy for the end user, but what needs to happen on the back end of all the systems talking to one another is a little bit more complicated. So one of the efforts we're doing as part of the concept operations is fleshing out all of those connection points to understand how these projects will interact, how these systems will interact, what data needs to flow between them so that traveler has a seamless experience. Next slide. So we have been working on some key policy decisions that need to come together for this entire program to work. So I'm going to highlight some of the bigger program ones, and then we're going to specifically highlight 4 transit-related policy issues. So the first two are really some assumptions that we had to make in order to keep progressing the concept of operations. And the first assumption we made is that there would be one centralized decision support system. So you saw that complicated architecture diagram. And really what this is saying is there'll be one system in the middle of that collects all of the data and makes decisions. So for instance, it might be something that gets information about buses that are coming on, understanding how the freeway is operating, and then relaying back to the bus that it's okay to use the part-time transit lane. So the first assumption we are using is that there will be one centralized system that's collecting. The second is that there will be a data center that collects and holds all of that data. And that means that we are sharing real-time data from all the different systems and having an open sharing policy. That doesn't mean open to the public, but it means open within the system so that the decision support system has the information it needs to be able to push out and make recommendations to all the other systems. Next slide. So some of the issues that we've set as needing to be decided early on for the larger program are delegated control. So in order for Innovate to come to life, we need to make sure that it can't work such that each agency or each system makes its own decisions. That centralized system I talked about on the earlier slide will need to take control of other systems. So a really good example of this is transit signal priority. And so it could be that the Innovate program is pushing from the Innovate program to a local city and running its signals to make sure the bus is coming seamlessly to get onto the 680 corridor. The next is automated control. A good example of this right now is ramp metering. We often set our ramp meters to run on an algorithm. We let them run. But there are other things that have operator intervention. And a good example of this is how the I-80 ICM corridor currently operates, where messages are not posted on a sign until an operator comes through and makes a decision to put that message up on a sign. What we're looking at in order to make this a completely seamless automated is that the decision support system will have enough data and enough algorithms to be able to make decisions and post those without operators having to make a decision. The system makes the decision for you. This isn't something that would be done day one. It would be once we're comfortable with the data, once we're confident that it's making the right decisions. And then lastly is there would still be some sort of operations center. We're not just going to set the system aside and not watch it. We would still have to have some sort of operators overseeing the system, taking over the system if it's not making the right decisions, or if there's a certain incident or something more regionally that needs to be changed on the Innovate program. So those are kind of some of the high-level program ones. What I want to do quickly is highlight 4 specific transit policy issues. This slide basically is showing that there's a whole lot of other policies we're going to have to walk through, but we'll get into these 4 policy issues for the transit. So the first one is connection protection. So when I first heard connection protection, I just kind of thought, no way. Because in my mind, it was that you're going to hold a BART train because a bus is running late. And I couldn't see a world in which that was going to happen. But once I did a little bit more exploring on how connection protection is working, what it really means is think about it in terms of the last bus at the end of the night. Would you hold it if you knew that the BART train was running late? Or the same way that the airlines have their connection protection, which is you have a certain number of passengers that would be impacted, they might hold the connecting flights. Or if the next train isn't coming for an hour, you might hold it for just 5 minutes. So connection protection really means that you are looking at different parameters in which you would hold and have a connection for somebody to have more seamless travel. It doesn't mean you would do it all the time, and it doesn't mean that some of the programs that have, or sorry, transit providers that have faster headways would participate in this. But it means that you would look at which ones make sense and making sure that people aren't stranded. So some things we should consider along with this are the Guaranteed Ride Home program, how that works, and other TDM strategies in the corridor. So I'm going to go through all 4 of these, and then we're going to stop and ask you guys for feedback. So the next one is on data sharing. So I said earlier that in order for the Innovate program to work, we have to have a lot of real-time data. We have to have a lot of real-time data to make decisions on the system. So we need to understand how is the freeway operating. So we need to have freeway speeds. We need to understand where the buses are. Are they running late? Are they full? We need to understand how there is bike parking. Is it available? So all of that is information that the Innovate system needs to have in real time in order to make decisions and provide users with information. We also need to have information on how your individual systems are performing so that we can make global changes to the system. So instead of just the real-time information, we need to understand how things are performing and make adjustments to the system so that we can continue to improve on the program. And that one of the additional considerations for this, though, will be cybersecurity, privacy sharing, cooperative agreements to go along with that kind of data sharing. Next slide. The third one, hot topic, we've talked a lot about this today, is part-time shoulder use. I'm not wanting to take this from the enforcement because that is a topic that needs to be worked out and discussed heavily with CHP. So the policy here for part-time transit really is looking at the bus operators and will they be comfortable having their drivers use the part-time transit lane? What would they need in order to make that happen? Training, understanding of how enforcement is happening, what do the actual transit operators need to have their bus drivers operate on the part-time transit lane? And then the last one is a little unwieldy, number 4, which is fare integration. One of the things that when you see the different scenarios for how Innovate will work is an end user starts their day by opening up an app and they say, I'm going to work, and it provides them with all these different options and it will tell them the cost of that option. So if they're taking 3 different forms of transportation, does that look like 3 different fares to them, or do they just get one fare integrated for the Innovate program? The reason this is unwieldy, I think, as you guys all know, is this is a larger topic within the region. So some of the policy decisions we want to have is might there be a flat fare throughout the Innovate program? How does that look into the bigger context? How is the Innovate program feeding information to the regional discussion around fare integration? And what concerns are specific to Innovate that we want to make sure are covered and addressed in the larger program? All right, Danielle, did I do okay going fast enough?
I think you did great. So we wanted to tee up these issues for you all because we are working with the TAC ConOps working group on the program level concept of operations. And when we talk about Innovate 680, it's institutional integration as well as technical integration. And when you talk about institutional integration, obviously it's laden with these policy issues. So in thinking about the entirety of this conversation and with an eye towards time, we wanted to hold the space for you all if you wanted to talk about some of the issues that Liz just mentioned. We highlighted 4 of them, the 4 that you see on the left-hand side of this slide in blue. And we'd be happy if you guys have the appetite for discussing some of the issues. Some of these are important to you and you want to have some conversation now because it'll help inform our program level ConOps that we're working on having a draft by mid-April. We can have that conversation now. Also, I just want to kind of connect the dots for how this conversation plays out in our next meeting, which is in April. We are thinking through the additional items related to transit. So we know that we outlined 4 of them, but there are some other ones that we know are on the horizon that we know we want to bring back to you all at future meetings. And they have to do with first and last mile connections, some of the big O&M conversations that include components like transit signal priority and on-demand transit. So, we wanted to give the opportunity first. So before I go any further, want to just open it up and see if there are any questions, discussion, want to go back to any of the 4 issues, and we can do that right now. Otherwise, we can put a pin in the conversation for the moment and revisit in April.
Well, and probably we'll want to revisit in April. I was just going to say, from my perspective, all 4 of those are very important for the success of what we're doing. And as we've had the overall presentation, as we've had the transit operator presentations, if we are missing one of those 4 components, we're going to be far less successful. And it sort of goes to what the Blue Ribbon Committee is looking at too, where we historically have been very siloed. And it's really important that even if we don't merge into one giant Uber transit agency, we continue to have this cooperative, not only working together, but sharing of data, coordinating of data. And then there will be the challenges, things like coordinating the metering ramps. Will Caltrans give it up, or will cities? How do you balance that? But I think all 4 of them are very important. Other board members. Or committee, I guess we're a committee. Other committee members. Sue.
No, I would just agree with you, putting a pin in it. I have certain ones that obviously I'm more interested in than others, but, I think it's also really important to hear sort of the pros and cons from, the transit operators. Sitting on County Connection, we hear a lot about certainly the fare integration piece and things like that. So I think when we talk about some of these things in April, I'd really like to hear sort of the pros and cons on some of this from the specific transit agencies that are involved, or at least certainly the ones around the I-680 corridor.
Great, thank you. Other committee members, any thoughts? Yes, Debbie.
I would concur with you, Supervisor Anderson and Sue. I think these are important topics, and particularly that connection timing. I think that looks like a difficult one with respect to, our trains going to be held. So I think we can move this on to the future.
I think more likely the trains won't be held. It's going to be us holding the buses. And we already do that a little bit. I have the feeling we're not going to expect BART to be holding trains. But regardless, still, that it's an important, as someone who's had to transfer before, that's a very stressful situation if you need to be somewhere and the next bus isn't going to come for 45 minutes, or you're going to miss the express bus and you're going to be stuck on a city bus. Those things are significant. And I think we've worked through that just as we have that great partnership with Bus Bridges. I would suggest, Tim, that we put this discussion earlier on the agenda to next month.
Yes.
I would also suggest we keep the agenda a little bit lighter if possible, just because there's a lot of really, really good information that, we're already 2.5 hours into this meeting, which again, I know CCTA meetings sometimes go all night and, and we can gear up, and maybe too, you can sort of prepare us for how much time you expect us. Any other committee members, people of the audience who have anything they'd like to add to this? Okay, we're going to move right on then to the next agenda item. Look forward to having this come back in April as well. And so we're going to be talking, I'm just looking at this, we got any more feedback from, we had 2 items from Danielle. Did you meld them into 2, or is there an additional PAC feedback you want, Danielle?
No, I think it's melded. And I think, Tim, you were going to cover this slide very briefly, the slide that was just up.
Yeah, I just wanted to cover this really, really briefly. So we've been sharing a lot of information with you at all of these policy advisory committee meetings. And one, appreciate your attention, your feedback, and your commitment to the PAC. And what I wanted to kind of, we're actually getting to a kind of culminating point in the process. We've been providing a lot of information to you, and tonight was kind of a snapshot of some of the decision making that's going to have to happen in the future, in terms of your feedback to help guide the overall program and kind of understand how we want to shape some of these institutional barriers in the future. And so I just want to spend a little bit of time that you are the policy advisory committee. And so as we start bringing recommendations to you for decision making, the decision making tree really happens in that middle column, where the program leadership team, the executive steering committee, that's where the decisions are happening. And so as those decisions are happening during the process, we're seeking feedback from you and recommendations from you that we can start making decisions and then bringing that to the full authority board and also other boards. So in April, we're actually going to start doing a series of Innovate 680 to the full authority board to really catch them up of where the policy advisory committee has been kind of going. So that way we can start really gearing and planting the seeds with both the PAC, the board, and start making some real critical decisions around all of these policies. And I think the important thing is that you are all our champions for Innovate 680 at each of your local jurisdictions. And so what we're really hoping that what you're doing is that when you're listening to this information and taking this information away with you, and also sharing this information with your other colleagues at your respective city councils, so that way we're gaining and building consensus around all of these policies and decisions, both with this group, but also with the greater community, the greater local jurisdictions. And so that's really our ask as we start moving forward and start making decisions. We want to make sure that you're our champion and really sharing this information with your respective councils, either during a city council member update or with your staff, however you want to do that. But it's intended to really garner that support and leadership of all of you with the local jurisdictions.
Well, and at some point, Tim, I'd love to see this come to the mayor's conference as well, because even though we do have, obviously CCTA representation from the mayor's conference, it'd be really helpful, again, to get a broader push out. I don't think we're quite there yet, but once we really feel like we have a plan. Go ahead, Karen. But you're muted.
I'm muted.
I'm glad we're changing to a future meeting, but the one thing I didn't hear when I go through these different policy considerations, these are all really critical, but the one I didn't hear is when you're getting along better, these different transit agencies, what about the salaries? And you're riding a bus and you don't know who's driving it, but what is the internal mechanism that we have to face with respect to salaries and different kinds of salary levels of these different agencies? And I'm not looking for an answer here. I'm looking for that as an issue to come forward.
Yeah, and they're working through I think through that issue, and that's sort of why you hear one agency is going to be driving the bus, and their contract's going to cover their drivers, and another contract's going to cover LAFTA's drivers, and a passenger, we don't want them to know. We don't think that it matters. It's just they're going to see a branded bus or a branded vehicle, and it could be a LAFTA, it could be a county connection, but it should look the same. And, to the extent there's already salary parity among agencies, just because oftentimes they're represented by the same unions, you do salary surveys. I don't know how far off we are. Some transit agencies, though, do have more innovation and different types of contracts than others, just based on their labor agreements. So,
yeah. So I got all that you said before, but I still don't have confidence that there won't be some issues here to address. So
you always will.
Thank you for the feedback.
Okay.
So now I'm going to turn it over to Danielle, and she's going to wrap up this item.
Okay. I am going to quickly close us out. So it was like you guys were leading exactly where we needed to go in terms of helping us identify future PAC meeting topics. So we have up on deck, in addition to the couple of items that we have moved to your next meeting in April, we have a couple of additional things that we're tracking. I'm not going to read through all of them here in the interest of time, but we wanted to also make sure to just note if there were any others. And so you all mentioned a couple, and we'll just ask real quick if there are any others that you want to put on our radar right now.
Okay, if anyone has one, just shout it out because I can't see you. So just unmute yourselves if there's something you don't see there. Looks like a great comprehensive list.
Okay, and we will not put them all on one meeting so that we have a 5-hour meeting. I promise you, we will not do that.
Not if you want good feedback.
I know. Well, we hear
Get
you.
tired after about 2 hours.
We appreciate you guys. All right, and so this is just the quick look ahead to the next series of meetings. So I will be sending out those calendar invitations. Thank you all so much. Like Tim said, you guys are awesome and being engaged and bearing with us through this hefty agenda. So Tim,
do you really want to do a meeting the night before taxes are due?
Poor Karen.
I don't know if people are doing their taxes at the last minute.
I hope they're not. But
I'm hoping they're not as well. But I'm just raising that in case there are people that are scurrying to get their tax returns done that evening.
Well, they have till the next night till midnight. So
that's what I was gonna say. They have a whole other night.
Oh, great.
Yeah, no. The only thing I was gonna say again, because we had such a wealth of information. If you feel that you cannot put everything into the April 14th meeting, I'm happy to have us consider holding a May meeting, just because I would rather spread it out rather than just doing the big fire hose. So
I'm with
please, you assess that, because I feel like I rushed you a little because I was trying to move the meeting along, and I'd be very happy to spend more time on these topics.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Tim and I will work very closely on the agenda, and I do want to just respond to a request you made at the beginning and mention that the slides from this meeting, as well as every meeting, are going to be posted on the CCTA website. So for those of you that wanted Chief Costigan's data,
that was me. Thank you.
Darren's data, that's all going to be there for you.
Wonderful. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Danielle.
Good about letting us know and even sending us links. So after meetings. Okay, well, that does bring us to the end of the meeting. Tim, anything else? Any words of wisdom for us?
No, just thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry that this went very long. We were not anticipating that. And so we will make sure that the content is appropriate for the time to get the right feedback from you. And again, thank you and good night.
Yeah, and it was all good information. I want to say that I certainly wasn't bored. It wasn't like people were just repeating themselves or talking slowly, just too much good stuff.
Yeah, Candace, good job running the meeting.
Great job.
You're very welcome. Glad to see you all, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Night. Thank you.